Dodge City, Kansas, in the year 1875, was a wound worn open on the prairie. The dust from Front Street, fine as flour and yellow as cornmeal, never settled. It rose in clouds from wagon wheels, from the hooves of cavalry mounts, from the shuffling boots of buffalo hunters and the high heels of women whose laughter was as loud and brittle as saloon glass. It was a town built on noise, the hammer of the blacksmith, the rumble of the new railroad cars, the sharp crack of a pistol shot that nobody bothered to look up from, and the constant, tinny piano music that leaked from a dozen doorways. Coda sat in the darkest corner of the Long Branch Saloon, a place he had learned to claim because it put his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. He wore a buckskin shirt, worn smooth and dark with weather and sweat, and his long black hair was tied back with a simple leather thong. His face, sharp and angular, might have been carved from the red rock of his homeland, and his eyes, dark and still, missed nothing. He watched the soldiers in their blue uniforms, fresh from the fort, their voices too loud, their boasts full of whiskey. He watched the cowboys, lean and dangerous, their spurs ringing on the floorboards. He watched the Mexican traders with their colorful blankets, and the pale, hopeful faces of immigrants heading west, buying supplies they did not know how to use. He was a man between worlds, and welcome in neither. He was Coda Greyhawk to the white men, a name they had given him. He was Tahan, the survivor, to the few of his people who were left. He was the Comanche who worked for the white man. He had just returned from a 3-week scout, guiding a cavalry patrol along the Cimarron, sniffing out a band of Comanchero traders. He had found them, and just as his contract required, he had guided the soldiers away from a fight, saving them from an ambush they were too blind to see. The soldiers in the saloon knew it. Some of them nodded to him, a gesture of rough respect for the skill that had kept their hair on their heads. Others looked away, their contempt clear. To them, he was still just an Indian, a tool to be used. The townsfolk were worse. They saw him as a tame savage, a curiosity, or a traitor who had sold his own kind for white man's money. They did not know the price of survival. A corporal, his face red with drink, slammed his glass on the bar and began to sing. It was a new song, one about a victory at adobe walls, a song of triumph. The tune was ugly, and the words were worse. Coda's hand tightened around the cool glass of water in his grip. The music, the laughter, it faded, and the smoke in the saloon became the smoke of his memory. He was back in the night, 3 years gone, the smell of burning buffalo hides and the screams. He saw the blue uniforms swarming the sleeping camp on the Washita. He saw the flash of sabers in the moonlight, cutting down women running for the river. He saw his wife, her eyes wide with terror, pushing their small son into his arms before a wall of canvas collapsed in on her in a shower of sparks. He remembered the heat of the fire on his back as he ran, the child's small body suddenly going limp against his chest, a stray bullet finding the one thing he had left to love. And he remembered the face of the man leading the charge, sitting high on a gray horse, his blonde mustache bright in the firelight, his sword pointing, his voice shouting orders. Captain Abel Reed, a face Coda saw every time he closed his eyes. Greyhawk. The voice cut through the memory like a dull knife. Coda's eyes focused. A young soldier stood beside his table, shifting nervously, his hand on his belt. The boy looked too young to shave, let alone wear a uniform. "You are Coda Greyhawk?" the soldier asked, his voice cracking. Coda said nothing, just looked at the boy. The silence stretched, becoming heavier than the saloon smoke. "Mr. Everett Hale wants to see you," the soldier finally managed, clearing his throat. "At the Dodge House," he said now. Coda nodded once, a slow, deliberate movement. He finished his water, placed the glass on the table, and rose. He moved with a coiled grace, silent on the loud floorboards, slipping through the crowd like a shadow. The soldiers and cowboys made way for him, their conversations pausing, their eyes following him until the bat-wing doors swung shut behind him. The Dodge House Hotel was another world. It smelled of soap and polish and money. The floors were carpeted, silencing his steps, and the walls were covered in paper printed with impossible flowers. Everett Hale's room was on the second floor, a private suite. 2 armed guards stood outside the door. They looked at Coda with open suspicion, but the young soldier who had guided him spoke a word, and they stepped aside, though one man kept his hand on his pistol grip. Everett Hale was not a frontier man. He was tall and solid, dressed in a black suit of eastern wool, with a starched white shirt and a silk tie. His graying hair was neatly combed, and his face was clean-shaven. He looked like he belonged in a Boston bank, not a dusty Kansas cow town. He was standing by the window, looking down at the chaos of the street, a glass of something dark in his hand. "Mr. Greyhawk," Hale said. Without turning, his voice was smooth, educated, and cold as a winter creek. "I am told you are the best scout in this territory, the absolute best." Coda remained silent by the door. He did not trust men who spoke in superlatives. Hale finally turned, his eyes appraising Coda as if he were a horse to be bought. "I am told you are reliable, that you honor your contracts. A rare thing in a man of your background." "What do you want?" Coda's voice was low, rough from disuse. A small, thin smile touched Hale's lips. He respected directness. It saved time, and time was money. "I have a job, a simple escort mission. I need my daughter taken from here to Santa Fe. From there, she will continue on to New Mexico, to the holdings of my associate, Mr. Silas Kane. You know of his railroad, I presume." Coda knew. Everyone on the plains knew of Silas Kane and his iron snake that was cutting the buffalo lands in half, bringing thousands more white settlers, soldiers, and trouble. "The trail is dangerous," Hale continued, taking a sip from his glass. "Apaches, Comancheros, outlaws, and, I am told, your own people are restless." Coda's eyes hardened. "My people are hungry." "Precisely," Hale said, nodding, as if Coda had made his point for him. "Which is why this offer should appeal to you. This is not a military contract. This is a private one, and I pay exceptionally well." He walked to his desk and opened a small ledger. "You will deliver my daughter, Lillian, safely to Mr. Kane's compound in New Mexico. In return, you will receive $200 in gold." It was a staggering amount, more than Coda made in 6 months of risking his life for the army. But he did not move. He knew there was more. Men like Hale did not offer a fortune for a simple job. "And," Hale added, watching Coda's face, "there is the matter of your band, the Quahadi, tucked away in Palo Duro Canyon. Are they not, or what is left of them?" Coda's body went rigid. The location of his band, the small group of survivors he protected, was a secret he had guarded with his life. "Do not look so surprised," Hale said softly. "It is my business to know things. The army is planning another sweep. They intend to clean out that canyon for good, drive your people to the reservation at Fort Sill, the bad land, the fever land." He let the words hang in the quiet room. "You complete this contract for me," Hale said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You deliver my Lillian safe and sound, and I will use my influence. I am not without it. In Washington, I can guarantee your people are overlooked. I can see that they are moved to reservation land with good water, that they receive proper medicine, not the spoiled flour and rotten blankets the Indian Bureau usually provides." Coda's mind was racing. He hated this man. He hated the smile that did not reach his eyes, hated the power he held so casually, the power to decide who lived and who starved. He hated the way Hale used the lives of his people, his elders, the children, as bargaining chips. It was a vile, impossible choice. Refuse and his band would be hunted and destroyed by men like Captain Reed. Except, and he would be selling his skills, his Comanche knowledge of the land, to serve the very men who were destroying it. He would be escorting the daughter of one railroad baron to the son of another, sealing the fate of the plains with a wedding. But then he saw the faces of his people, the old woman who had taught him his prayers, her hands now twisted with hunger, the small children with ribs showing and the coughing sickness that rattled in their chests. He was Tahan, the survivor, and he would do what he must to ensure they survived. "I will do it," Coda said. Hale's smile widened, this time with genuine satisfaction. "Excellent. You will travel light and fast. Just you, my daughter, and a young Mexican boy to handle the wagon. You leave at dawn." Coda turned to go, his heart heavy as a stone. The deal was done. One more trip. This time, it was truly for his people. As his hand touched the doorknob, he glanced out the open window. Across the street to the balcony of the hotel's main wing, a young woman was standing there, looking down at the street. He had not seen her before. She was dressed in a traveling suit of dark blue, the kind of dress that must have cost more than his entire year's pay. Her hair was a light brown, pinned up in a way he had only seen on Eastern women. She was watching the street with an expression he could not quite read. It was not fear. Exactly, it was curiosity, mixed with a sharp, intelligent vigilance. Coda looked away. She was just another piece of white property, a spoiled daughter of a rich man, being shipped west like a crate of fine china. He did not know that her name was Lillian. He did not know that she had been standing in the adjoining room, her ear pressed to the connecting door, and that she had heard every single word. "Mr. Greyhawk," Everett Hale's voice stopped him one last time. Coda turned. The polite mask was gone. Hale's face was hard, his eyes flat and cold as a banker's heart. "Remember this," Hale said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of an executioner's axe. "I have paid for your skill, not your loyalty, but I expect the result. If any harm comes to my daughter, if she suffers so much as a scratch or a fright, I will not wait for the army. I will personally see to it that your band is the first to pay the price. They will be wiped from the earth. Do you understand me?" Coda held the man's gaze. He understood. He was trapped. He was a warrior bound by a white man's chains, not of iron, but of medicine and water and the lives of his people. He gave a single, curt nod and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. The armed guards watched him go, their hands still on their weapons. As Coda stepped out of the hotel and back into the dusty street, the air was split by a long, mournful sound. The evening train, the Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe, was pulling into the station. Its whistle echoed off the false-fronted buildings, a scream of iron and steam. It was the sound of the new world, the sound of power, the sound that was devouring the land. And it seemed to mock him, promising a future that had no place for him, or for the woman he had just agreed to protect. The dawn broke thin and gray, a smear of watercolor over the endless flat line of Kansas. Coda was waiting before the first light touched the muddy street. He had already checked the wagon, a sturdy buckboard chosen for endurance, not comfort. His own mount, a lean pinto mare that knew his weight and his moods, stood patiently beside it, steam rising from her nostrils in the cool air. He had watched the young Mexican boy, Thomas, harness the team. Thomas was perhaps 16, his face smooth and his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. He was terrified of Coda, which Coda preferred. Fear made a man predictable. The main doors of the Dodge House Hotel opened, spilling weak yellow light onto the boardwalk. Lillian Hale appeared, silhouetted against the lobby. She paused for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the gloom. She was not dressed for a Boston parlor. She wore a riding habit of heavy, dark blue wool, tailored with a severity that seemed designed to repel the very air around her. It was custom-made, practical for sitting a horse, yet still hopelessly complicated for the world she was about to enter. A small hat with a short veil was pinned to her neatly coiled hair. She walked down the steps, her back perfectly straight, carrying a small leather satchel. She did not look at Coda. She surveyed the wagon, the nervous boy, and the single Comanche scout, and her lips thinned. Coda saw her intelligence in that single, appraising glance. She was smart. He had to give her that. He had also heard her speak to the hotel staff in a clipped, functional Spanish, so she was not entirely helpless. But she had been raised to believe her position in the world was a fortress, and her expression was that of a queen inspecting a barracks she found wanting. Tomas, attempting a bow, stammered, "Señorita Hale, I am Tomas. I will drive the wagon." Lillian gave him a curt nod, her gaze finally moving to Coda, who stood unmoving by his mare. She looked at him as if he were a particularly unpleasant piece of equipment. "This is my protection?" she asked. Her voice was clear, carrying easily in the quiet morning, laced with the sharp, clipped accent of New England. I understood my father paid for a troop of soldiers. He did not tell me he had hired only one man. Coda met her gaze. Her eyes were gray, like the sky, and just as cold. He did not bother to tip his hat, a gesture he despised. He simply let the silence sit for a beat. "One man is enough," he said, his voice a low rumble. "If you learn to listen." Her eyes flashed, a spark of anger. But she was too disciplined, too much her father's daughter, to argue with the help in the street. She turned, allowing Tomas to help her onto the wagon's hard bench. She sat, arranging her skirts, her back rigid, her face set. Coda swung into his saddle in one fluid motion. He did not look back. He nudged the Pinto into a walk, leading the way out of the sleeping, dangerous town. The wagon wheels groaned. Thomas clicked his tongue at the mules, and they moved south, leaving the noise and the smoke of Dodge City behind them. The world opened up. For the first 2 days, they were swallowed by the plains. The Santa Fe Trail was not a road, but a series of ruts, a wide, braided scar on a land so vast it seemed to drink the sky. They passed herds of longhorn cattle being driven north, their drovers looking like men made of dust and leather. They passed skeletal remains of other wagons, monuments to bad luck or bad planning. To Lillian, it was an assault on the senses. The sun was not a gentle warmth. It was a physical weight, a hammer that beat down from a white-hot sky. The wind never stopped, carrying the smell of dry grass, the alkaline bite of dust, and the constant, inescapable odor of horse sweat and unwashed men. She felt gritty. Her skin was tight, her lips were cracking, and the relentless creaking of the wagon axle was a new kind of torture. She was accustomed to a life of schedules, of order. This was chaos. On the third afternoon, the heat was at its peak. Lillian, her face flushed under the small hat, finally broke her stiff silence. "Mr. Greyhawk," she called out. Coda slowed his mare, letting the wagon catch up, though he did not turn to look at her. "I require a stop," she announced. "It is past 3 o'clock. I wish to change out of this dusty habit, and I would like some tea." Tomas looked at Coda, his eyes wide, waiting for the order. Coda kept his face toward the horizon. "We stop when the horses need water, or when the sun goes down," he said. "I am not a horse, Mr. Greyhawk," she snapped. "And I am not a piece of cargo. I am your employer. I insist you stop this wagon." Coda finally turned his head, his gaze sweeping over her. He saw the sweat on her upper lip, the frustration in her eyes. He looked at her as if she were a child who had spoken out of turn. "This land does not care about your tea," he said, his voice flat. "And it does not care about your insistence. We are exposed here. We keep moving." He turned his back on her and nuded his horse forward. Lillian's hands clenched into fists in her lap. She glared at his back, a solid, buckskin-clad wall of infuriating, savage ignorance. He was exactly what her father's associates said these people were: uncivilized, rude, a brute who understood nothing of refinement. The attack came an hour later, in the worst possible place. They were crossing a wide, shallow basin, miles from any cover. The grass burned yellow and flat. Coda sensed it first. He did not hear it, he felt it. A vibration through the saddle, a wrongness in the air. His head came up, his body tensing. He scanned the low ridges on the horizon. "What is it?" Lillian asked, her voice sharp with nerves. And then she heard it. A high, ululating cry that seemed to come from the earth itself. Over the ridge to the east, a line of riders appeared, maybe 8 or 9, painted and feathered, riding low and fast. "Comanche," Tomas breathed, his face going pale. He crossed himself, his hands shaking so badly he dropped the reins. "Keep the wagon moving," Coda roared. But Tomas was paralyzed. He was fumbling for a crucifix around his neck. The riders were coming on fast, whooping and firing rifles into the air. One of them, painted with white and black stripes, veered toward the wagon. Before Lillian could even scream, a hand tangled in her dress and yanked her clear off the bench. She hit the ground with a force that knocked the wind from her, the taste of dirt and panic filling her mouth. Coda was not a man anymore. He was a machine. As the first rider leaned down to grab Lillian, Coda was already off his pinto, his rifle in his hand. He shoved Lillian's shoulder. Hard. Wagon under the wagon. He did not wait to see if she obeyed. He slid behind the rear wheel, using it for cover, his rifle coming to his shoulder. The world narrowed to the sights. A painted rider charged, confident. Coda squeezed the trigger. The shot was deafening. The rider flew backward off his horse. Lillian scrambled on her hands and knees, terror giving her strength, and rolled under the buckboard, pressing her face against the dusty floor planks, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. Coda fired again. Another rider, this one aiming at Tomas, clutched his chest and fell. The attackers, startled by the accuracy and speed of the defense, pulled up. They circled, just out of rifle range, yelling in what sounded like a parody of a war cry. Coda watched them. His eyes narrowed, his breathing steady. He was reloading, his movements economical and precise. He watched one of the riders who had fallen, the first one he had shot. The man was not dead, but he was wounded, trying to drag himself. Coda saw the man's feet. He was wearing United States cavalry boots. He shifted his gaze to another rider, one screaming curses as he fired a pistol wildly. The man's war paint was smeared, and beneath it, his skin was pale. He sat his horse awkwardly, using a heavy, silver-horned Mexican saddle that no Comanche warrior would ever use. As the man turned, he shouted something at his companion, and Coda heard the words clearly. "He is just one man. Get the girl, you fool." It was English, not the broken English of the frontier, but the hard, flat accent of a man from Boston or New York. These were not Comanche. Coda rose from behind the wheel. Stepping into the open, he raised his rifle, took a calm breath, and shot the man with the Eastern accent clean out of his saddle. That was enough. The remaining attackers had no stomach for a real fight. They were performers, and their audience was shooting back. They wheeled their horses, yelling in a mixture of faint war cries and plain English profanity, and fled back over the ridge. The silence that fell was more shocking than the noise. It was broken only by Tomas, who was retching beside the wagon tongue, and the sound of Lillian, still under the wagon, taking in sharp, shuddering gasps. Coda walked over to the man he had shot first, the one with the cavalry boots. The man was dead, his eyes staring at the white sun. Coda knelt, his face impassive. He checked the man's pockets. Nothing but a twist of tobacco and a few coins. He moved to the second man, the one with the Eastern accent. This one was also dead. As Coda rolled him over, something fell from his vest pocket and glinted in the dust. It was a silver dollar, but not government issue. It was a token, a large, heavy coin. Coda picked it up, rubbing the dirt away with his thumb. On one side, an eagle. On the other, an interlocking set of letters, KRLC, and words he could just make out: Cane Rail and Land Company. Lillian had crawled out from under the wagon. Her fine dress was torn at the shoulder. Her hat was gone, and her hair was tumbling down, dark with sweat and dirt. She was shaking from head to toe. her face a mask of white terror. But she was alive. This was the first time in her life she had truly faced the possibility of her own death. She found her voice, and it came out as a shriek. "Your people," she screamed at Coda, pointing a shaking finger at the dead man. "Was that your people? They tried to take me. They tried to kill us." She was falling back on the only narrative she knew savages. Coda walked toward her, the silver coin heavy in his palm. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at her where she huddled against the wheel. His expression was colder than any winter she had ever known. "Get up," he said. She did not move, just stared at him, sobbing. "They were not my people," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. He gestured with his rifle at the dead man nearest her. "Look at him. His paint is running. Look at his boots, his saddle. He cursed his God in your language before he died." Lillian's sobs hitched. She forced her eyes to focus on the corpse. She saw the pale skin under the red paint. She saw the thick army-issue boot. "But who?" she whispered. Why dress like you?" Coda looked at the silver token in his hand, then closed his fist around it, the metal biting into his skin. He slipped it into his pocket. He looked at the long, empty trail ahead of them, toward Santa Fe, toward Silas Kane. "Someone does not just want you to arrive," he said, his voice hard. "They want you dead on the way." He turned away from her, his mind already calculating. The threat from his father, the large payment, the lives of his band held as collateral. And now, a staged attack, paid for by the very company she was being delivered to. He stalked over to Thomas, who was still shaking. "Get water for the mules. We are leaving now." He walked to Lillian, who was still frozen by the wagon. He did not offer a hand. He did not offer comfort. "Get in the wagon," he commanded. "The next ones might not be actors." He understood. This was not an escort mission. This was a game. And he and the woman were pieces on a board, being pushed toward a trap. And he, Coda, had just been hired to make sure the bait arrived alive. They made camp in a shallow depression that offered little protection but was at least out of the ceaseless wind. Coda chose the spot with a grim economy, allowing them only a fire of dried buffalo chips, which gave off a pungent smoke but little light. Tomas, his fear having finally given way to exhaustion, was wrapped in a blanket near the mules, already lost to a twitching, troubled sleep. Lillian sat on the far side of the small fire, her back against a wagon wheel. The tin cup of coffee Thomas had made her before collapsing was black, bitter, and cold. But she held it in both hands as if it were a fragile, warm thing. Her hands would not stop shaking. She had tried to pin her hair back up, but the strands were wild, full of dust and bits of grass. Her torn dress was a mockery of her former life. She was trying, with all the breeding of her Boston blood, to remain composed, but the image of the painted, falling man, the sound of the gunshot, the raw, brutal reality of her own smallness, kept replaying in her mind. Coda was not resting. He sat on his heels, a dark shape just outside the ring of firelight, cleaning his rifle. His movements were fluid, precise, and utterly without peace. He disassembled the weapon, oiled the parts with a small rag, and put it back together with a series of quiet, metallic clicks that set Lillian's teeth on edge. He had not spoken a word to her since his final command to get in the wagon. He was all animal watchfulness, a coiled spring of violence she had hired. Or rather, her father had. She watched him through the flickering, smoky light. He was not just a savage, not just a brute, as she had first thought. He was something else. He was the only thing that had moved with purpose while the world was ending. He had not panicked. He had not prayed. He had fought, and he had recognized those men. He knew, and he had not told her. The silence in the camp stretched, becoming as vast and empty as the prairie around them. Finally, her anger overran her fear. She could not stand the not knowing. "Who were they?" she asked. Her voice came out as a croak. She cleared her throat and tried again, forcing the tremor out of it. "You said they were not Comanche. Who were they?" Coda finished seating the bolt and squinted down the barrel, aiming it at the darkness. "They were white men," he said, his voice as flat as the land. "Bad actors, paid by someone to wear a costume they did not understand, paid to look like my people." "Paid by whom?" The token in the dead man's pocket said Kane Rail and Land Company. Lillian's breath hitched. "Mr. Kane, that is impossible. He is my host. He is my father's partner. He is the man I am traveling to meet." "Then he has a strange way of welcoming his guests." Coda finally looked at her, his eyes unreadable in the shadow. Or perhaps he was testing his security. Testing me. "Testing you. They tried to kill us. They pulled me from the wagon." "They were clumsy," Coda corrected, his voice cold. "They were paid to be loud, not to be good. If they had been my people, we would be dead. They would not have charged in the open. They would have waited for the creek crossing, crippled the wagon, picked us off one by one. Those men were trash, hired to fail, or perhaps hired to succeed, and they were simply not good enough." Lillian stared at him, horrified by his cold assessment. She put the cup down, her hands suddenly steady. "You think someone wants me dead?" He looked back at the fire. "I think someone wants you to arrive in Santa Fe under a cloud of fear. Or not at all." He paused, and his next words were heavy. "The question is, which one does your father want?" "My father," she snapped, her pride wounded. "My father is trying to protect me." "My father hired you," Coda said, his voice soft, "to deliver a package. He is a careful man. He would not hire a Comanche if he trusted the soldiers. He would not hire one man if he thought the job was easy. He knows the trail. He knows what is out here." He let the implication hang. "So who wants me dead?" Lillian asked, her voice a raw whisper. Coda looked at her, his gaze finally settling on her, holding her. "The man who paid to have you brought here," he said slowly, "or the man who does not want you to arrive." The riddle, the impossible, balanced statement, broke something in her. She realized he was not her enemy. He was not her servant. He was like her, a piece in a game she did not understand. And he was the only person on this godforsaken plain who had told her a single, hard truth. She made a decision. It was a risk, a terrible risk, but it was not as bad as the risk of doing nothing. She reached for the leather satchel at her feet. She had guarded it with her life, sleeping with its strap around her wrist. She unbuckled the flap and pulled out a packet of papers, wrapped tightly in oilcloth and tied with twine. "I am not what you think I am," she said, her voice low and hurried, as if speaking the words aloud would doom her. "I am not just a dutiful daughter being sent west to marry a man I have never met. I am not a piece of cargo." She unwrapped the packet. Inside were folded documents, a few letters, and a map, hand-drawn on linen. "I have been writing," she said, her gaze fixed on the papers, "for newspaper in Boston, under a man's name. I have been investigating Silas Kane and my father for 6 months. These papers, this is the proof." Coda did not move, but his focus on her sharpened, became absolute. "This map shows the lands the Army has cleared of Indians in the last year. And these letters, they are from a paymaster, a man who worked for Kane. They prove Kane has been hiring men, outlaws, ex-soldiers, dressing them as Comanche, as Apache, and sending them to attack his own surveyors, to burn small settlements." She was speaking quickly now, the words tumbling out. "He creates the violence. He sends reports back east of the savage uprisings. He demands the Army protect his railroad. And the Army comes, and they clear the land. They push the native people out or kill them. And then Kane, with my father's money, buys the land for pennies an acre from a grateful government. It is a lie. A whole bloody lie." She looked up at him, her eyes burning with a desperate, righteous fire. I am not going to New Mexico to marry anyone. I am going to Santa Fe. I have a contact there, a lawyer, and a journalist from the Santa Fe New Mexican. I am going to give them this. I am going to expose him. I am going to stop him." Coda listened, his face a mask of stone. The story she told, the story of fake attacks, slotted into his world with a sickening click. It was the reason his own band was being hunted. The army was not just stupid. It was being fed a diet of lies. Lies that were paid for by the father of the woman in front of him. "Your father," Coda said, his voice flat. It was not a question. Lillian's face crumpled. The fire left her, leaving her looking young and tired and ashamed. "My father is his partner," she whispered. "He is the money. He is the respectable face in Boston, in Washington. He raises the capital. He knows. He must know." Or rather, she corrected, her voice full of a daughter's bitter clarity. "He has made a perfect study of not knowing. He sees the profits. He does not ask about the blood, this marriage to Silas Kane's son. It is not a marriage. It is a merger. It is the price of my silence. It is to make me part of the family, part of the crime, so that I can never speak against them." Coda felt a cold, black rage rise in him, so powerful it almost made him dizzy. He was protecting her. He was protecting the daughter of Everett Hale, the man whose money was paying for the bullets, for the soldiers, for the burning of camps just like his, the threat to his own people. The leverage Hale held over him was a direct result of the crimes this woman was describing. He was a fool. He was a dog, leashed by his own grief, protecting the hand that was feeding his people to the wolves. The sound of hoofbeats, distant but clear in the morning air, broke the tension. Coda was on his feet before the sound had registered in Lillian's mind. He kicked dirt onto the fire, hissing at Tomas to wake up and stay with the wagon. "Get your horse," he ordered Lillian. "Now. We are exposed." A line of riders appeared on the horizon, dark against the rising sun. They were not Indians, real or fake. They wore the blue of the United States Cavalry. A patrol, a dozen men, with a guidon flag snapping in the breeze. They rode up, slowing as they saw the small camp. At their head was an officer, his uniform clean, his face confident. He sat his horse with an easy arrogance. He was blond, with a full mustache, and his blue eyes were bright and cheerful in the morning light. Coda's blood turned to ice water. His hand dropped to the handle of the knife at his belt, and he willed his fingers to stay loose. It was him. It was the face from his nightmares, the face he saw in the fire. Captain Abel Reed. Reed reined in his horse, his gaze sweeping the camp. He saw the wagon, the nervous Mexican boy, the Comanche scout, and then he saw Lillian. His hat came off in a sweeping, gallant gesture. "Ma'am," he said, his voice as smooth as polished wood. "Captain Abel Reed, United States Cavalry, at your service. It is a relief to see you are safe. We had reports of some rogue Comanche activity in this sector. Some settlers killed. A wagon train burned. It is no place for a lady." His eyes, bright and empty, slid over to Coda. He smiled. It was not a smile. It was the baring of teeth. "Well, well," he said, his voice full of a false, booming cheer. "If it is not Greyhawk, still playing scout for the white man, I see. My compliments. Ma'am, your father hired the best. He is a devil, this one." He winked at Lillian, a gesture of shared civilization, before his gaze returned to Coda. The cheerfulness vanished, replaced by a look of such pure, cold contempt that Lillian took a step back. Reed looked at Coda as if he were a piece of filth he had found on his boot. He leaned forward on his saddle, his voice dropping slightly. "It is good to see you. Tahan," he said, using Coda's Comanche name. A deliberate intimacy that was more violent than a blow. Brings back memories. Does it not, that night on the Washita? All that firelight? You ran fast, I will give you that. Coda did not breathe. He stood, his hand on his knife, and met the man's gaze. He poured all the hate, all the memory, all the pain into that single look. He said nothing. Reed laughed, a short, barking sound. He turned back to Lillian, his smile returning. "We will ride with you for a spell, ma'am. If you do not mind, see you safe to the next crossing." As the patrol formed up around the wagon, Reed maneuvered his horse so that it was shoulder to shoulder with Coda's pinto, boxing him in, his back to Lillian. Reed's smile was gone. His face was a mask of cold authority. "You are a long way from the reservation. Boy," he whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. "You are on a short leash. You do your job. You get this woman to Silas Kane, and you get her there quiet. She is high-strung. See that she does not make any trouble. You do that. You do it well. And I might put in a good word. Make sure your mangy little band of survivors gets a patch of ground with a creek on it. You know, the good land." He leaned in, his knee pressing against Coda's. "But you fail me. If she gets lost, or if she starts talking to the wrong people in Santa Fe, if you do not deliver her as promised, I will personally lead the charge. I will find every man, woman, and child of your blood, and I will finish the job I started on the Washita. I will burn you from the earth. Do you understand me?" Lillian had not stayed by the wagon. She had moved, her instincts screaming, pretending to check her horse's cinch. She was too far to hear every word, but she heard the names. She heard band. She heard Washita. She heard the raw, undisguised threat in his voice. She saw the look on Reed's face, a look of sadistic pleasure. She looked at Coda. He was not a savage. He was not her enemy. He was a man in a cage, and Captain Reed held the key and the torch. Reed straightened up, his face becoming pleasant again. He tipped his hat to Lillian. "A pleasure, Miss Hale. We will ride on ahead. We have savages to hunt." He spurred his horse and the patrol trotted away, leaving a cloud of dust and the stench of arrogance. The three of them stood in the silence. Tomas was shaking again. Lillian looked at Coda, her face pale, all her fine, Eastern theories about justice, all her plans with the newspapers, they seemed thin and childish in the face of the brutal, simple reality. She was not the only one being blackmailed. They mounted their horses. The air between them had changed. It was no longer distrust. It was a shared, terrible understanding. After they had ridden for a mile, Lillian moved her horse alongside Coda's. "We are still going to Santa Fe," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Coda stared straight ahead, at the endless, empty line of the horizon. His face was carved from granite. "I will get you to Santa Fe alive," he said. His voice was hollow. "Dead." He did not look at her. He could not. His mind was a trap, and the walls were closing in. He had to deliver her, to fulfill his contract, to save his people. But to deliver her was to hand her over to the men who wanted her silenced, to hand her over to the same system, the same men, who had taken his wife and his child. He was being paid to escort a woman to her own execution, and the price of his refusal was the lives of everyone he had left. The silence that followed Captain Reed's departure was heavier than the heat. There was nothing to say. The threat had been laid bare, a drawn knife on the table, and it pinned both Coda and Lillian to their separate, impossible obligations. Tomas, understanding none of the English but all of the menace, kept his eyes on the mules and his mouth shut tight. They moved on, leaving the open plains and entering a harder country. The land began to break, rising into sun-baked mesas and falling away into dry arroyos that were like wounds in the earth. The wagon bumped and scraped over rock, and the dust was no longer fine and yellow, but a biting red grit that got into their mouths, their eyes, and their very souls. The journey became a study in endurance. Each day was a brutal, sun-scorched copy of the one before, and each night was a cold, star-pricked eternity. Lillian's fine wool riding habit was a disaster. It was torn, stained, and impossibly hot, after she nearly fainted from the heat while trying to climb a steep incline. Coda had watched her, his face impassive, as she leaned against the wagon wheel, gasping. "Tomas," Coda had said, his voice flat. "The bag, the one Mr. Hale packed with supplies." Thomas, confused, had rummaged in the back of the wagon and pulled out a canvas duffel. Coda took it, opened the ties, and pulled out a pair of rough canvas trousers, a man's linen shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat. They had been left by some surveyor or traveler, forgotten in the back of the wagon. Coda threw them at Lillian's feet. "Your dress is a signal," he said. "It tells everyone you do not belong. It is a weakness. Change." Lillian's face flushed with indignation. "I will not wear a man's clothing." Coda turned away, already walking back to his mare. "Then you will die of the heat," he said over his shoulder. "Or you will fall and break your neck because your skirt caught on a rock. I do not care which, but we are not stopping for it." That night, behind the flimsy cover of a blanket Lillian had hung, she shed the last piece of her Boston life. She folded the heavy, ruined dress and packed it away. When she emerged, the pants were too large, belted tight with a piece of rope, and the shirt was baggy. But she could move. She felt exposed, and yet, for the first time, she felt practical. When she climbed onto the wagon, she did not need Thomas's help. The change in clothing was the first crack in the wall. The second was the land itself. It demanded things of her. Coda was no longer just her guard. He was her teacher. He taught her how to mount the horse properly, not side saddle, but astride, like a man, like him. The first time, he had to help her. He stood beside the mare, and his hands, calloused and sure, spanned her waist. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. She landed on the saddle with a small oof, her entire body electric from the casual, impersonal strength of his grip. She felt the heat of his hands through the thin shirt, and he let go as if he had been burned, his face turning away before she could see his expression. He taught her how to read the land, to see the faint green line that meant water, to watch the hawks to find rising air. She, in turn, found herself talking to him by the fire. The silence had become too much, and his presence, once a threat, was now the only constant. "In my father's library," she said one night, staring into the flames, "we have books on justice." Coda was sharpening his knife, the stone making a soft, rhythmic shushing sound. He did not look up. "Justice," she continued, as if thinking aloud. "It is a word they use. They say the law is justice, but I do not think I have ever seen it." "It is a white word," Coda said, testing the blade with his thumb. "Like freedom." "You have many words for things you do not have." "What is your word for it?" she asked. He stopped, his hands still. He looked at her, and his eyes were not cold, but deep, like a dark pool. "We do not have a word for one thing. We have a word for balance, a word for what is right, a word for living with the earth, not against it. You cannot own justice any more than you can own the wind or the sky." She taught him the letters. She would scratch JUSTICE in the dirt with a stick. He, in turn, would point. "Tosa," he said, pointing to the pale, dry grass. "Pia," pointing to the sky. "Vva," pointing to the red earth. They were small, careful exchanges, fragments of worlds colliding, but for a few minutes each night, they were not a guard and his prisoner. They were just a man and a woman, lost and talking in the dark. The trail led them to the Cimarron River, a shallow, muddy ribbon of life in a parched land. They had been weeks without a proper wash. The grit was a second skin. "You have 1 hour," Coda said, reining in his horse. "The water is low. We are not exposed. Thomas will water the animals. I will stand guard." He pointed to a bend in the river, where a high, cut bank and a cluster of cottonwoods offered privacy. "Do not go out of sight of those trees. Do not make noise. I will be on the ridge." Lillian took a piece of soap and a towel and scrambled down the bank. The water was cool, not cold, and it felt like heaven. She waded in, her linen shirt and canvas trousers clinging to her, and scrubbed the dust from her hair, her face, her arms. She felt human again. She was in water up to her waist, ducking her head under, when her foot slipped on a patch of slick mud. She went down, swallowing a mouthful of gritty water, her feet finding no purchase. She came up sputtering, panicked, and slipped again, her arms flailing. She did not even see him move. He was suddenly just there, in the water with her, having come off the ridge like a hawk diving. His face was a mask of furious concentration. His hands clamped onto her arms, hauling her upright, his strength shocking. They stood chest deep, facing each other, the water swirling around them. Her wet hair was plastered to her face, and her thin linen shirt was transparent, clinging to every curve of her body. He was fully dressed, his buckskins dark and soaked, his knife still at his belt. He was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from something else. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her mouth, then lower, to where the wet shirt revealed the pale skin of her shoulders and the dark shape beneath. Coda's heart was pounding, not from the fall, but from the look in his eyes. It was not cold, it was not angry. It was a raw, male hunger, a deep and startling awareness that he had kept chained, and that this accident had just set loose. Coda seemed to realize where he was, who he was, what he was seeing. A look of self-disgust flashed across his face. He released her so abruptly she almost fell again. He turned his back on her, a solid, wet, tense back, his muscles corded with anger. "Get dressed," he growled, his voice thick. "I will wait on the ridge. You have 5 minutes." He plunged out of the river and disappeared up the bank without looking back. Lillian stood, her body trembling, her skin feeling as if it had been burned where he had touched her. She had been seen, and he, the Comanche warrior, had been rattled. It was a dangerous, terrifying, and thrilling piece of knowledge. The next day, they saw the smoke. Coda saw it first, a thin column of black against the perfect blue, miles to the south. He did not say a word. He simply turned his mare's head and kicked her into a lope. "Coda," Lillian called, as Thomas was forced to whip the mules to keep up. "Where are you going? That is not the trail." He did not answer. They found what was left of the camp an hour later. It had been a small band, perhaps 3 families, tucked into a fold of the hills. It was not a war camp. It was a hunting camp. The teepees were burned, the skeletons black and stark. Bodies lay scattered, mostly women and old men. The attackers had been thorough. Coda slid from his horse and walked into the devastation, his face unreadable. Lillian and Thomas stayed back, horrified. The smell of death, of burned hair and hide, was overwhelming. Coda stopped, his eyes scanning the ground. He knelt, picking up a spent shell casing. He held it up. It was brass, new, and marked with the insignia of the Fort Union Armory, the same kind Reed's men carried. He walked past the body of an old woman, his face tight, and then he stopped. A warrior lay near the ashes of a fire, his arms outstretched as if to ward off a blow. Coda stared at the man's face. He let out a sound, a low groan, and he sank to his knees. "Ta!" he whispered. He touched the man's shoulder. "My friend." Lillian, watching from a distance, felt his grief like a physical blow. This was not an anonymous savage. This was his friend. Coda rose, his face transformed. The control was gone. He looked like a wolf, his eyes burning with a murderous rage. He saw the horse tracks, a dozen or more, shod horses, heading northeast, toward Reed's patrol route. He grabbed the reins of his mare, his rifle in his hand. "Coda, no!" Lillian said, running toward him. He did not even look at her. He was swinging into the saddle. "No!" she screamed, grabbing his arm. It was like grabbing a piece of granite. You You ride after them. They will kill you. You are one man." "They will pay," he snarled, his voice a guttural rasp. "And what about your band?" she cried, the words tumbling out, the only ones she could think of to stop him. "What about the people Reed threatened? You die here, you die for nothing, and he will keep his promise. He will kill them all. He will kill them because of you." He froze, his leg half over the saddle. Her words had found their mark, the one place his rage could not defend. "You cannot," she said, her voice softening, but still fierce. "You cannot leave me. You cannot leave them. We need you. I need you to get to Santa Fe." He looked at her, his eyes wild with pain and trapped fury. He slowly, so slowly, took his foot out of the stirrup. He stood there, shaking, his whole body thrumming with the need for violence, and the terrible, cold logic of her words. A sound, small and thin, cut through the terrible silence. A whimper. Coda's head snapped toward a pile of buffalo hides near a collapsed travois. He moved, his knife in his hand. All scout again. Lillian followed him. He kicked aside a burned piece of wood, and there, huddled in a small hollow in the earth, was a child, a little girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, her face smeared with tears and soot, her eyes wide with terror. She looked at Coda, at his Comanche face, and then at Lillian, with her pale skin. She whimpered again and tried to shrink back into the dirt. Coda's face changed. The rage vanished, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow. He sheathed his knife and knelt. He said something, a single word, in his own language. It was soft, like a question. The girl just stared, trembling. Coda reached out his hand, palm up. He waited. Lillian, her heart breaking, knelt beside him. She did not know his language, but she knew the language of a frightened child. She began to hum, a soft, tuneless melody from her own childhood in Boston. The girl's gaze flickered from Coda to Lillian. She was a small, living thing in a field of death. Coda looked at Lillian, a question in his eyes. Lillian just nodded, her own eyes filling with tears. Coda scooped the girl up. She was light, a bundle of sticks. She did not fight, just hid her face in his neck, her small hands grabbing fistfuls of his shirt. Her name, they would learn later, was Naya. She was the only one left. They could not leave her. She was a complication, a burden, a danger, and she was a reason. Coda, his face now set in a new, grim determination, placed her in front of Lillian on her horse. He then went back, and with a terrible, methodical duty, he began to move the bodies of his friends, covering them with rocks. That night, a storm found them. The sky, which had been a clear, cruel blue, turned a bruised purple and black. The wind howled like a mourner, and the rain came down in solid, freezing sheets. They found shallow shelter in a washout, a small cave under an overhanging ledge. It was cramped. They huddled together for warmth, the mules and horses stamping nervously outside. Coda sat at the mouth of the cave, his rifle across his knees, watching the lightning flash. Lillian sat deeper inside, wrapped in a blanket, holding Naya, who was asleep, her small body finally limp with exhaustion. Lillian had sung her every English lullaby she knew, her voice soft and shaky in the roaring dark. Naya had not understood the words, but she understood the tone. In a lull in the storm, Naya stirred, whimpering in her sleep. Coda turned, his silhouette dark against the flashing storm. He moved closer, sitting near them. He spoke to Naya, his voice so low Lillian had to strain to hear. He was not speaking English. He was speaking Comanche, and his voice was not the hard, flat voice of the scout. It was the voice of a father. It was soft, rhythmic, and full of strange, gentle sounds. He was telling her a story about the wild horses, the Mustang, who ran with the wind and could never be caught. Lillian watched him. She could not understand the words, but she saw his face in the flicker of a distant lightning strike. It was gentle. It was loving. She looked at this man, this savage, who had seen his friends slaughtered and had wanted to die in revenge, but had stopped, who had taken a lost child as his own, who was now telling that child stories of freedom in a language the world was trying to erase. Everything she had ever been taught, every book she had read in Boston, every newspaper article that described the Indian problem, it all felt like a brittle, hollow lie. If the Comanche were savages, what did that make Captain Reed, with his clean uniform and his threats of genocide? What did that make her father, with his clean hands and his profits? She looked at Cod, who was now sitting with his back to the cave wall. Naya's small head pillowed on his thigh. Naya was not quite asleep. She looked up at Coda, her eyes trusting. She said something, her voice small. Coda did not answer. "What did she say?" Lillian whispered. Coda was silent for a long time. The storm was passing, the thunder rumbling off to the east. "She spoke in Comanche," he said finally, his voice quiet. He did not look at Lillian. He looked out at the rain-washed land. "She said," Coda translated, his voice rough, "that you have eyes, like the sky, after the rain has cleaned the air." He paused. "She said, the land has chosen you." He looked over at Lillian then, his gaze heavy, and in his eyes she saw the reflection of the clearing sky. He was looking at her, but he was seeing something more than a woman in a damp blanket. He was seeing, perhaps for the first time, a person, and Coda, to his own quiet horror, realized he was no longer just protecting a contract. He was protecting her. The wagon, with one wheel wobbling and a split axle, limped into the settlement of San Geronimo like a wounded animal. It was not a town. It was a handful of low, adobe buildings huddled around a dusty plaza and a small, whitewashed church whose bell was cracked. It was a place that existed on the fringes, a speck of human stubbornness in a vast, uncaring landscape. It was a place of gray areas, populated by Mexican traders, a few white men who had left the United States for their own reasons, and Pueblo families who had been here before any of them. Coda led them to the largest building, which served as a cantina, a general store, and a blacksmith shop. A man was shoeing a horse in the shade, his hammer ringing with a steady rhythm. He looked up as they approached. He was a man of indeterminate age, his face deeply lined from the sun, his eyes sharp and dark. He wore a clean white shirt and a red bandana, and a thin cigar was clenched in his teeth. "Coda," the man said, his voice surprisingly smooth. He nodded, not in welcome, but in acknowledgement. He looked at Coda's companions, the pale, exhausted woman in the strange trousers, the wide-eyed Mexican boy, and the small, silent Comanche child Coda lifted down from his horse. "You bring interesting company." "Miguel," Coda said, his voice flat. "The wagon needs a wheel. The axle is split." Miguel Santos walked over, circling the wagon, his eyes missing nothing. He looked at the deep gouge in the side, where a bullet had scored the wood. "Bad roads?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. "Comancheros?" Coda asked, ignoring the question. Miguel's smile faded. He spat a bit of tobacco. "They are out, always, but they are bold this season. They have new rifles. They seem to have money." He looked at Coda. "They are working for someone. Not just for themselves." His gaze drifted to Lillian. "A new wheel and a new axle will take a day, maybe 2. You can have the room in the back. It is clean." For 2 days, they lived in a strange, suspended peace. The settlement was a tiny island of civilization. There was hot food, beans and fresh tortillas, and a real well with cold water. Tomas, happy to be speaking Spanish and away from the terror of the trail, worked on the wagon with Miguel. Naya, who had been a silent ghost, attached herself to the wife of the blacksmith, a warm, round woman who clucked over her and fed her honey cakes. bringing the first small, hesitant smile to the child's face. Lillian watched this, and she watched Miguel. He was a man who knew things. He treated Coda not as a savage, but as a dangerous professional. He treated Lillian with a polite, almost clinical curiosity. On the second evening, while Coda was in the blacksmith shop with Thomas, watching the new axle being fitted, Lillian approached Miguel in the store. He was weighing out bags of flour. "Señor Santos," she began, her voice low. "Señorita," he said, not looking up. "I need a favor. I have documents. They are very important. I need them to get to Santa Fe, even if I do not." Miguel stopped his work. He slowly tied the top of the flour bag and looked at her. His eyes were very, very sharp. "You are the woman for Silas Kane, the one from the east. The whole trail is talking about it. The daughter of Everett Hale." Lillian flinched. "You know my father." "I know his money," Miguel said. "It is in the new rifles the cavalry carries. It is in the barbed wire that is cutting the ranges. And it is in the pocket of Silas Kane." He leaned on the counter. "What kind of documents?" Lillian, deciding on a partial truth, said, "Proof that Kane is not what he seems." Miguel laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Señorita, we all know what Kane is. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I have a contact, a lawyer in Santa Fe. I need to get these to him. I have copies. I want to send them with your next wagon train, as insurance." Miguel studied her for a long moment. "Insurance," he mused. "A dangerous word. It means you expect to die." He tapped his fingers on the wooden counter. "I have a train of hides and wool leaving at dawn. It is slow. It will be 2 weeks behind you. But it is safe. My men are good." He named a price. It was high. Lillian paid it in gold from a small purse she had kept hidden. She handed over the smaller packet of papers, the copies she had made. "One more thing," Miguel said, as he tucked the packet away. "You are going to a lawyer. That is fine, but you should know. The governor of New Mexico dines at Kane's table every week. The judge in Santa Fe owes him money. The army captain at Fort Union, Reed. He is like a son to him." He looked at her, his eyes full of a weary pity. "You are not walking into a courtroom, Señorita. You are walking into the wolf's den, carrying a piece of fresh meat." That night, the settlement came alive. It was someone's feast day, or perhaps they simply needed a reason. A fiddler and a guitarist appeared in the plaza, and someone lit a series of small lanterns. The music was a wild, joyful mix of Irish reels and Spanish corridos. People emerged from the adobe houses, clapping and laughing. Lillian, restless and filled with Miguel's warning, stood in the doorway of the cantina, watching. Naya was with her, her eyes wide, clinging to Lillian's hand. Coda stood apart, as he always did, in the deep shadow of the blacksmith's awning, his arms crossed, a silent, watchful guardian. A young vaquero, his face bold and handsome, his shirt embroidered, saw Lillian. He swept off his hat in a grand gesture and asked her to dance, his Spanish full of compliments. "No, gracias," Lillian said, trying to wave him off. But the young man was insistent, and his friends were cheering. He took her hand, pulling her gently toward the music. Lillian, caught between her Boston prudery and the infectious joy, gave a small, helpless laugh and allowed him to lead her into the fast, swirling dance. She was clumsy at first, but she was a good dancer, and she soon caught the rhythm. Coda watched. He watched the way the vaquero's hand rested on her waist. He watched the way her face, which he had only ever seen pale with fear or tight with anger, was now flushed with color, her hair coming loose, a genuine smile on her lips. He felt a low, possessive growl in his own chest, a feeling so primitive and unexpected it shook him. She was his job. She was his responsibility. That was all. The song ended. The vaquero, bold from the music and the pulque he had been drinking, bowed and tried to steal a kiss. Lillian turned her head, her smile vanishing, her hand coming up to push at his chest. "CA plus or por favor," she said, her voice sharp. The man's friends laughed. He grabbed her wrist. His pride stung. "One kiss, princesa." Before the man's lips could get any closer, a shadow fell over them. Coda had moved from the darkness so fast, so silently, that no one had seen him coming. His hand closed around the vaquero's wrist. He did not grab, he did not hit, he simply applied pressure. The vaquero's face went white. The bones in his wrist ground together. He let out a sharp cry and released Lillian. His knees buckling, Coda released him, and the man stumbled back, clutching his hand, his eyes wide with fear and respect. The music had stopped. The entire plaza was silent, staring at the Comanche in their midst, the man who had just dismantled their best dancer without a sound. Lillian stood in the sudden silence, her heart pounding, her face hot. She looked at Coda, who stood before her, a solid wall of quiet menace, and in that moment, she was not afraid of him. She was angry at her father, at Cain, at Reed, at the whole world that had put them in this position. The fiddler, sensing the tension, nervously started a new tune. It was a waltz, slow and sad. Coda looked at Coda. His face was a mask in the lantern light, in a gesture of pure, unthinking defiance. She held out her hand to him. "Dance with me," she said. Coda stared at her hand. It was a white woman's hand, soft but strong. To touch it in this public place was a line he had never crossed. It was a statement. "I do not dance," he said, his voice low. "Yes, you do," she insisted, her voice soft but unbreakable. "You are a warrior. You have danced. Now, dance with me." He looked at her, at the challenge in her eyes, the eyes that were the color of the sky after a storm, and slowly, deliberately, he put his rifle, which he had been holding, on a nearby bench. He put his calloused, scarred hand in hers. He led her to the center of the plaza. He was awkward, stiff. He had not held a woman this way since his wife, since the world was young. His hand on her waist was strange, separated by her clothes, but he could feel the warmth and the shape of her. She put her other hand on his shoulder, and she could feel the solid, coiled muscle beneath his shirt. They moved. It was not a dance. It was a slow circle, but the sight of it silenced the plaza for a good. The warrior in his buckskins, his black hair tied back, and the lady from the east, in her borrowed canvas trousers, moving together under the yellow lanterns. It was a picture that did not belong in the world, and yet, here it was. It was beautiful, and it was terrible, and everyone who watched knew they were seeing something they would never see again. When the music ended, he dropped his hand as if it were on fire and stepped back, his face returning to its cold, hard mask. He grabbed his rifle and walked back to the shadows. Lillian, trembling, went and found Naya, her heart a confusion of triumph and fear. Later, as they packed the wagon for the morning, the tension between them was a living thing. "You should not have done that," Coda said, his back to her, lashing a water barrel to the side of the wagon. Done what Lillian asked, though she knew. Made a spectacle, drawn attention. "He was touching me. You stopped him." "That was my job. The dancing was not—" Lillian's anger, held in check for days, finally snapped. "Is that all it is, a job? You are my father's hired man. Is that it? You just do what you are told, even when you know it is wrong." He pulled the rope tight, the knot biting in. "I do what I must," he said, his voice a low growl. "I keep you alive. I get you to Santa Fe. I get my people water and medicine. That is the deal." "And what then?" she demanded, stepping in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "What happens when you deliver me? When you hand me over to the man who hired those fake Comanches, to the man who has Captain Reed in his pocket? What happens to me then, or is that not part of the deal?" His face was hard. That is not part of the deal. She felt as if he had slapped her. After the dance, after the river. She had thought. She did not know what she had thought. "So you are a coward," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage and hurt. "You are just like him, like Reed. You use your people as an excuse. You are strong enough to fight, but you are too afraid." He grabbed her arm. His grip was not like the vaqueros. It was not a man trying to be fresh. It was iron. His eyes were not cold. They were on fire, blazing with a pain so deep it stopped her breath. "You do not know," he hissed, his face close to hers. "You, with your Boston books and your safe world. You do not know what it is to see your child die in your arms, to watch your people starve. You talk about justice. You talk about truth. Those are luxuries. Those are for people who have not had to choose between two ways of dying. People die here every day. Miss Hale. Their names are not remembered. Their justice is not found. They are just gone. You are young. You are foolish. And you will get us all killed." He released her arm, shoving her back, and turned to stalk away into the darkness. Lillian stood, tears of hot, angry shame stinging her eyes. He saw her as a child, a fool, and maybe he was right. They left San Geronimo at dawn, the argument hanging between them, a wall of ice. The ambush came 3 hours later. They were in a narrow pass, the red rock walls rising high on either side. Coda was riding point, his senses on high alert. He had not liked this pass. It was a trap. The first shot was not at them. It was a shot high above, striking the rock, sending a shower of pebbles down. A voice, in rough Spanish, echoed down from the rim. "Halt the wagon. Leave the woman and the child, and the Indian can go." Coda's rifle was in his hand. "Comancheros," he said to Lillian. His voice all business. The anger from the night before gone, replaced by cold calculation. They are not Cain's men. These are the real ones. They work for themselves. "What do they want?" Lillian breathed, her hand going to Naya. "Us," Coda said. "Me for a slave. You for ransom. Naya for worse." More men appeared on the rim, and a group of riders spurred their horses from a hidden side canyon, blocking the path behind them. They were a hard-looking crew. A mix of Mexican, white, and half-blood men, armed to the teeth. There were at least 15. "Tomas, keep Naya in the wagon. Under the canvas," Coda roared. He swung off his horse, pulling it down for cover. "Lillian, my rifle bag. The extra ammunition." She did not hesitate. She flew from the wagon, grabbing the heavy bag from his saddle. A bullet whined past her head. So close she felt the heat of it. She dropped to the ground behind the wagon wheel, her heart hammering. "How many?" she gasped. "Too many," Coda said. "He fired." A man on the rim cried out and disappeared. "They will not stop. They want the wagon. They want you." They fought. Coda was a demon, firing with a speed and accuracy that was terrifying. He moved from the wheel to a rock, never staying in one place. Lillian, her hands shaking, loaded the spare rifle, just as he had shown her. She fired at a man on the ridge, and she did not know if she hit him, but he ducked. A man on a fast horse charged them, a rope in his hand, trying to get to the mules. Coda stepped out from cover, shot him at close range. As the man fell, another rider came from the other side, and his rope snaked out. It was not aimed at Coda. It was aimed at Naya, who had peeked out from the canvas. The loop settled over the child's shoulders. "No!" Lillian screamed. Coda saw it. He roared, a wordless sound of pure rage, and he lunged. He dropped his rifle, pulling his knife as he ran. He dove for the rope, cutting it in midair as the horse reared. He landed hard, rolling. But the move had cost him. He was in the open. Before he could regain his feet, 3 men were on him. He fought, his knife flashing, but a rifle butt came down on the back of his head, and the world went black. Lillian screamed as she saw him fall. She raised her rifle, but a hand grabbed it from behind. twisting it from her grip. A large, bearded man, his teeth yellow, grinned at her. No more fighting, Bonita. She was grabbed. Naya was screaming. Thomas was dragged from the wagon, weeping. It was over in 30 seconds. They were taken. Their hands were bound. Coda was slung over a horse like a sack of grain. Bleeding, they were led up a hidden, twisting canyon, and their world of dust and sky was replaced by shadow and rock. The Comanche camp was a nightmare. It was a large, hidden box canyon, stinking of unwashed men, cheap liquor, and fear. Stolen goods were piled everywhere. Other women, their eyes dead, were huddled near a fire, watched by armed guards. Their leader was a man named El Lazo. The rope! He was the one who had tried to rope Naya. He was tall, his face a web of scars. He looked at Coda, who was now conscious, his head pounding, his hands tied. A Comanche, El Lazo said in Spanish, looking at Coda's hair. His face, good, strong. He will bring a high price in the Sonora mines. He then turned his attention to Lillian. He walked around her, his eyes taking her in. He saw the quality of her boots, the canvas pants. He yanked the rope that held her hands, pulling her close. And this one, too skinny for my taste, but she has spirit. He grabbed her chin. And she has the look of money. Who is she? Before Lillian could speak, Coda, his voice thick, said, "She is no one, a farmer's daughter, worth nothing." El Lazo backhanded him. "I did not ask the Indian." He looked back at Lillian. "Who are you?" Lillian, her mind racing, made a choice. She remembered Miguel's words. She drew herself up, her voice shaking but clear. "I am Lillian Hale, my father is Everett Hale, and I am traveling to marry the son of Silas Kane." The camp went quiet. El Lazo's grin faded. He knew those names. Those were not the names of farmers. Those were the names of kings. "Kane," he whispered. He looked at Lillian, his eyes widening with a new, greedy understanding. "You are Kane's woman." He started to laugh. "This is better than gold. This is a gold mine. Kane will pay a fortune for you, a king's ransom." He turned to his men. "Take the Indian. I want to know where his people are. The army pays well for the location of a hostile camp." 2 men dragged Coda to a post, Lillian cried out. "They tied him." And El Lazo picked up a coiled whip. "Where is your band?" Comanche El Lazo asked. Coda spat blood on the man's boot. "Go to hell." El Lazo hit him. The whip cracked, and Coda's body arched, a line of red appearing on his buckskin shirt. Lillian screamed. El Lazo hit him again. "Where?" Coda just stared at him, his eyes full of hate. He did not make a sound. El Lazo raised the whip again, but Lillian ran forward. "Stop, stop, please!" El Lazo paused, his arm in the air. "You do not like it, Bonita." "He does not know anything," she cried, her mind racing, desperate. "He is just a scout, a stupid Indian. He is not worth your time. He is my property. My father bought him." Coda's head came up, his eyes burning into her. The lie, the terrible, demeaning lie, was a worse blow than the whip. "But I am," she said, turning to El Lazo, her voice gaining strength. "I am worth your time. You are right. Silas Kane will pay. He will pay anything, but he will not pay if his bride arrives damaged. And he will not pay if her escort, her property, is missing." She was inventing, her mind working faster than it ever had in her life. "This is a business deal. You are a businessman. I see that, so let us make a deal." El Lazo slowly lowered the whip. He was intrigued. "Let him go," she said, pointing to Coda. "And the child? They are nothing. Let them go. Keep me. I am your prize. Send a rider to Santa Fe with your demands. But you must let them go. If you do not, if I am not safe, my father and Mr. Kane will send the entire United States Army. They will hunt you, and they will hang you. But if I arrive, after my ransom is paid, I will tell them you treated me with honor, and you will be a rich man." Coda was staring at her, his face a mask of disbelief and a new, terrible fury. She was trading her life for Naya's. El Lazo thought it made sense. The Indian and the child were complications. The woman was the gold. "And how do I know you are not lying?" he asked. "I am offering myself," Lillian said, her voice shaking. "He," she pointed to Coda, "has people to protect. I only have myself." Coda let out a roar. "No!" he yelled, straining against the ropes. "Lillian, shut up! Do not be a fool!" El Lazo smiled. The Indian's anger was all the proof he needed. He cut Coda from the post and threw him to the ground. "Put the Indian and the child in a tent. We will let them go in the morning. But put her in my tent, and guard her well." That night, the camp drank. They were celebrating. Lillian was tied by her wrist to the central pole of El Lazo's tent, a small, filthy space that smelled of stale tequila and old leather. She sat in the dark, her terror a cold, physical thing. She must have dozed, because the first thing she felt was a hand over her mouth. She started to scream, her eyes flying open, and the hand clamped down harder. A voice whispered in her ear, a voice that was pure, concentrated rage. Not a sound. It was Coda. He was in the tent, a ghost. He had a knife in his hand. He sliced the rope on her wrist. He had already freed Naya and Thomas, who were waiting by a cut in the back of the tent. He had killed the guard. His face was dark with his own blood and with a fury she had never seen. He grabbed her hand, and his was not the hand of the dance. It was a vice. He pulled her through the slit in the canvas. The camp was asleep, drunk. He led them, low and fast, between the tents, toward a narrow game trail that led up the canyon wall. They climbed, Lillian's lungs burning, her hands raw. They were halfway up, 100 feet above the sleeping camp, when a shout came. They had been discovered. "Go," Coda hissed, pushing Lillian. "To the top!" They scrambled up, rocks sliding under their feet. Below them, the camp was a swarm of angry hornets. Gunshots flashed in the dark. They reached a narrow ledge, a crack in the rock, barely wide enough for one person. Coda shoved Lillian, Naya, and Thomas into it. "Stay here. Do not move. Do not make a sound." He took his position at the mouth of the crevice, his stolen knife in one hand, a rock in the other. He was a warrior, making a last stand. They waited. The shouting below got closer. 2 of El Lazo's men were climbing, their shapes dark against the sky. Coda waited until the first man was 5 feet away. Then he moved. He dropped the rock on the man's head, and as the man fell, he grabbed the second, pulling him forward, his knife finding the man's throat. It was silent. It was brutal. It was over in a second. He looked down. No one else was coming. They had given up, deciding to wait for daylight. Coda sank back into the crevice, his body blocking the entrance. He was breathing hard. Thomas and Naya were huddled at the back, terrified. Coda and Lillian were pressed together in the narrow space, his side against hers, their shoulders, their hips, their legs touching. They were trapped. They were alive. The adrenaline was a poison, a fire. Lillian was shaking. The reaction to the fear, the climb, the escape. Coda was shaking too, with rage, with the effort, with the pain from his head. She looked at him in the thin starlight. His face was a mask of blood and dirt. She reached up, her hand trembling, and touched the cut on his temple. He flinched, but he did not pull away. His eyes were on her, black, intense. "You foolish woman," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You would have given your life. For me. You would have given yours," she whispered back. They were too close. They were breathing the same air. The fear of death, the proximity of it, was an intoxicant. It stripped away Boston. It stripped away the Comanche. It stripped away everything but the man and the woman, clinging to a rock face, alive. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not the kiss of the vaquero. It was a kiss of rage and fear and a desperate, agonizing need. It was a claiming. His mouth was hard, tasting of blood and dust. And she answered him, her hands coming up to clutch his shirt, her own desperation matching his. This was not a surrender. This was a battle. He pulled back, breathing hard, his forehead pressed to hers. "We are going to die here," he whispered. "I know," she breathed. "I do not care." And in the cold, dark, narrow space, with death waiting below, they clung to each other. It was not love. It was life. It was a desperate, frantic, and wordless affirmation that they were still breathing, still warm, still human. His hands were rough, finding the shape of her under the canvas clothes, and hers were clinging to his shoulders, her body arching to meet his. It was a brief, silent, and wild coupling, a desperate act of defiance against the cold stars and the men who were waiting to kill them at dawn. After, they lay pressed together, the cold seeping back in. Lillian's head was on his shoulder. His arm was around her, his hand still holding his knife. Thomas and Naya were asleep, or pretending to be. The silence was absolute. Lillian stirred, her voice a small, broken thing in the dark. "Tomorrow," she whispered, her lips against his skin. If we live, will you be my escort again, the man my father hired?" She felt his body tense. "Or," she whispered, "will you be the man who walks beside me?" Coda stared out at the cold, empty sky. He could see the first, faint hint of gray in the east. Dawn was coming, and the men below were waiting. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice as rough as the rock around them. "We just have to live." But in the darkness, where she could not see, he closed his eyes. He knew. The contract was broken. He was no longer her escort. He was her accomplice. And he was, God help him, lost. Dawn broke, not with light, but with a slow, gray pain that revealed the world far below. The Comanchero camp was stirring. "We go now." Coda's voice was a rasp, his face a mask of dried blood and grim purpose. He was already at the mouth of the crevice, peering down the far side of the canyon wall. "Tomas!" he hissed. "You will carry the child. Stay behind me. Miss Hale, you will stay behind Tomas. Do not look down. Do not stop. If you slip, do not scream." They moved, a desperate vertical line of shadows. The rock was cold. The handholds were small. Lillian's borrowed trousers, a mockery in San Geronimo, were now the only reason she could make the climb. Below them, a shout. They had been seen. A rifle shot cracked, the bullet screaming off the rock face, peppering them with stone chips. "Go!" Coda roared. It was no longer climbing. It was falling, with purpose. They slid, they scrambled, they tore their hands raw on the sharp rock. Tomas, his face a mask of terror, was breathing in high, tearing sobs, the child in his arms. They reached a narrow, sloping scree field that led to the canyon floor, 100 feet below. Coda went first, half sliding, half running, his feet finding purchase where it seemed there was none. He turned, holding his arms up for Naya. "Throw her to me," he yelled at Tomas. Tomas, his eyes wide, could not. He froze. "Do it," Coda bellowed. Tomas, weeping, held Naya out and let her drop. Coda caught the child, a bundle of rags and terror, and shoved her behind a boulder. "Now, you." Lillian launched herself, sliding on her hip, the rocks tearing at her. She hit the bottom in a heap, Coda already pulling her to her feet. Thomas was last. He was too slow. He looked down, and his foot slipped. He did not fall. He slid, gaining speed, his cry a thin, sharp thing. He hit a rock outcrop and his body cartwheeled, landing in a terrible, broken heap on the stones, his neck at an angle that was not human. "No!" Lillian screamed, starting toward him. Coda's arm shot out, a bar of iron across her chest. He is gone. We have to... He is gone. Koda's voice was not human. It was an order from a god of this stone. We go, or we die here with him. He grabbed Naya, pulling her onto his back, her small arms locking around his neck. He seized Lillian's hand, his grip a vice, and he ran, pulling her with him. They ran down the canyon, away from the rising sun, away from the shouting, and away from the small, still shape on the rocks. They did not stop running for a mile. When Lillian finally fell, her lungs burning, he let her rest for 10 seconds. He had found what he was looking for, a small side canyon where 2 horses were picketed, left by the guards he had killed on the climb. He had also recovered the men's rifles and a belt of ammunition. He threw Lillian onto one horse, mounted the other with Naya in front of him, and they rode. They did not look back. The next 3 days were a blur of exhaustion and grief. They rode west, toward Santa Fe, their killers at their back and their jailers in front, but the man who rode with her was not the man who had kissed her on the mountain. That man was gone. In his place was the escort. Coda was a machine. He was cold, silent, and brutal in his efficiency. He pushed them from before dawn until after dark. He rationed the stolen food, a handful of hardtack, a strip of jerky. He said nothing that was not in order. Eat, drink, mount up. Coda's body ached. Her hands were raw. Her heart was broken, and a new cold anger was building in her chest. She had offered him her life, and he had taken her body, and now he was treating her like a stranger, like cargo. The wall he had built was no longer just silence. It was a fortress of cold duty, and it hurt more than El Lazo's whip. "Coda," she said one evening, as he checked the perimeter of their cold camp. "Thomas." "He is dead," Coda said, his back to her, scanning the ridgeline. We left him. We are alive." That is all you have to say." He finally turned to look at her, his face lit by the pale moonlight. The cut on his temple was a dark, angry line. "You wanted the man who walks beside you," he said, his voice low and vicious. "That man is dead. That man died in the camp with his friend. He died on the mountain with his wife. I am the man who gets the job done. I am the escort. I am taking you to Santa Fe because I must, and I will not let you, or your heart, or my own, kill the people who are waiting for me. Do you understand?" She understood. He had shut the door. He had chosen. He was still a prisoner, and what had happened on the mountain was not an escape. It was just a different kind of fall. She did not speak to him again, except to say yes or no. Santa Fe appeared, not as a city, but as a low, brown stain against the mountains. After the vast, empty wilderness, the town was a shock. It was loud. It was crowded. It smelled of wood smoke, livestock, and civilization. Adobe buildings lined a bustling plaza. Men in clean suits and women in fine dresses walked on raised wooden sidewalks. Soldiers from Fort Union, their uniforms brushed, their boots shined, moved with a confident swagger. The change in Lillian was immediate. As they rode into the plaza, she was no longer the wild woman in torn canvas. She was Miss Hale. She sat up straight, her chin high. The people parted for her. They saw a lady, disheveled, but still a lady. The men, even the soldiers, tipped their hats. And then they looked at Coda. He was just another Indian. He was a dirty savage, a piece of the wilderness that had strayed too close to the light. The same men who had bowed to Lillian now stared at Coda with open, hostile contempt. They saw his long hair, his buckskins, his Comanche face, and they saw a threat, or a trophy. Naya, sensing the hate, hid her face in Coda's back. "Stop here," Coda said, reining in before a large, impressive building, the finest on the plaza, with a sign that read, "Cane Rail and Land Company." Before they had even dismounted, the doors opened. A man stepped out, not with a gun, but with a smile. He was in his 50s, dressed in a black Eastern suit of the finest wool. He had a silk vest, a gold watch chain, and a neatly trimmed gray beard. He was handsome, powerful, and his eyes, as he took in the scene, were as sharp and cold as blue ice. "Lillian," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. He walked toward her, his arms open, as if she were a beloved daughter returning from school, not a ransomed prisoner. "My dear girl, you have arrived. Thank God." It was Silas Kane. He helped her down, his hands gentle. "You must be exhausted. You have had an adventure." "I see." "Mr. Kane," Lillian said, her voice steady, though Coda could see her trembling. Kane's gaze moved to Coda. He appraised him. The child, the horses, the blood. His smile did not waver. "And this must be the famous Coda Greyhawk, my associate, Everett Hale. Wrote of you. He said you were the best." He extended a clean, soft hand. Coda looked at it, then looked at Kane. He did not take it. He slid from the horse, Naya clinging to him. Kane's smile tightened. Just a fraction. He was not used to being refused. "Well," he said, "a fine job. A hard job. I have no doubt. You have earned your pay, and my gratitude." He snapped his fingers. A man in a suit, a clerk, appeared with a leather bag. "Your bonus, Mr. Greyhawk, $200, as promised, and 100 more, for the difficulties." Coda looked at the bag of money. It was more than he had ever seen. "You will come inside." "Lillian," Kane said, his arm already around her. "A bath, a new dress. My son is waiting to meet you. We have a party planned." My papers," Lillian said, her voice strained, looking at the satchel still on her horse. "My men will take care of everything," Kane said, steering her toward the door. "Wait," Coda said. His voice stopped them all. Kane turned, his politeness wearing thin. "Yes." "The child," Coda said, indicating Naya, who was peering at Kane with terrified eyes. "She is with me." Kane looked at Naya as if she were a piece of dirt. "Ah, an orphan. No doubt. The frontier is full of them. Captain Reed is here. He manages the Army's affairs with your people. I am sure he will find a place for her. An orphanage, a school, somewhere. Appropriate." The doors of the saloon across the plaza swung open, and Captain Abel Reed himself strode out, his uniform immaculate, his blonde mustache waxed. He saw the group and his face split into a grin. "Well, well," Reed boomed, crossing the plaza, his spurs jingling. "Look what the wind blew in. Miss Hale, a pleasure. You are looking rustic." He then turned to Coda, his smile vanishing. "Your job is finished, Greyhawk. You delivered the package." He stepped close to Coda, his voice dropping. "I told you to get her here quiet. This," he gestured to her torn clothes, "the missing wagon, is not quiet. But you got her here. Now take your money, take your brat, and get out of this town. You are bad for the scenery." Lillian had been frozen, but the sight of Reed, the sound of his voice, broke her paralysis. She tried to step toward Coda. "Coda, my papers, the satchel, you must—" But it was too late. A woman, a severe-looking woman in a black dress, a housekeeper, had appeared, along with 2 other female servants. They surrounded Lillian, clucking, taking her satchel, her arms. "Come, dear," the housekeeper said. "You poor thing, a hot bath." "No, wait," Lillian said, trying to look back at Coda. "Coda!" But she was swept inside. Coda watched her go. A flash of blue canvas swallowed by the rich, dark wood of the doorway. The door, heavy and carved, closed with a soft, final thud. It was the sound of a vault, the sound of a prison. Coda stood alone in the plaza, the heavy bag of money in one hand, a small, trembling child clinging to his other. He was on the wrong side of the door. Naya looked up at him. her small voice a knife in the sudden quiet. She spoke in Comanche. "Tahan," she asked. "An." She pointed at the door. "Will you leave her with those wolves?" They smiled, but their teeth were sharp. Coda looked at the door. He had done his job. He had the money. He had the child. He had failed Tomas. He had failed Lillian. But he had not failed his contract. He had delivered her. He could leave. He could take this money, buy food, buy medicine, buy horses. He could ride back to his people, and for one more winter, they would survive. He had done all he could. He turned his back on Kane's fortress. He walked, leading the two horses, Naya's hand in his, to the general store. He bought ammunition. He bought flour, bacon, coffee, and 2 small blankets. One for Naya. He bought a new canteen. He was preparing to leave. He was preparing to ride south, to keep his bargain, to save his band. He was lashing the supplies to the saddle of the second horse when he heard Reed's voice. The captain was standing on the boardwalk in front of the saloon, talking to one of his own sergeants. They were drinking, celebrating the arrival of the boss's woman. Coda was in the alley, in the shadow, but their voices carried. "She is a handful, that one," the sergeant said, laughing. "Looks like she gave the Indians some trouble." "She is done giving trouble," Reed said, his voice low, but Coda heard him. He froze, his hand tightening on the rope. "What do you mean, Captain?" "Kane is not a fool," Reed said, "nor is Hale. She is a radical. That one. Been writing letters, causing problems. They had to get her out here to shut her up. The wedding is just for show." "So what happens?" Reed took a long drink from his glass. "So, tomorrow night, we have the little engagement party. Everyone sees her. Everyone sees how happy she is. And then, on the ride back to the fort, her carriage will have an accident, a terrible, tragic accident. A broken wheel on the high pass." "An accident," the sergeant repeated, his voice flat. "Exactly, and the worst part," Reed said, his voice full of mock sorrow, "is that when my men investigate, they will find signs of a Comanche attack, a small, renegade band, the same ones who have been hitting the settlements. It is a tragedy, but it will give us all the reason we need to finally clean out that den of vipers in the canyon. The one Hale's man, Greyhawk, has been protecting." The sergeant was silent for a moment. "So, we hit the Comanche camp as retaliation. 2 birds with 1 stone, Reed said, and he laughed. Kane gets his silence. I get my promotion, and those red devils get the hell they deserve." He clapped the sergeant on the back. "Come on, let us get another drink." Coda stood in the alley. The world had stopped moving. The sounds of the plaza, the wagons, the shouting, all faded to a dull roar. He was not a man. He was a stone. They were going to kill her. They were going to use her death as the excuse to finish the job they started on his wife, to murder Naya's family, to exterminate his people. He would lose Lillian. He would lose his band. He would lose everything. He looked at the bag in his hand. The money. $300. A king's ransom. The price of his people's survival. And the price of Lillian's death. He looked at the paper money, the clean, crisp banknotes from Everett Hale, from Silas Kane, the price of his soul. With a low, guttural sound, he opened his hand. He did not drop the bag. He threw it. He threw it into the street, into the mud and the manure. The bag burst, and the paper money, the white man's promises, scattered in the filthy street. A gust of wind caught them, sending them tumbling, worthless, through the dust. Naya looked at him, her eyes wide. Coda looked back at the closed door of Kane's prison. He was no longer an escort. He was no longer a paid man. He was not even a survivor. He was a warrior, and he was going back. The night before the party was a night of ghosts. Lillian, bathed and scrubbed by silent, watchful servants, was a prisoner in a room of suffocating luxury. They had taken her canvas trousers and her torn shirt, the clothes she had lived in, fought in, and bled in. They had burned them. In their place, they had laid out a dress of green silk, a dress that whispered when she moved, a dress that felt like a shroud. Her hair had been brushed, her skin lotioned. She was once again Miss Hale, a fragile piece of property, her wildness scoured away. But they had not scoured the fire from her mind. They had locked her in, but the window overlooked a small garden, and the drop to the ground was perhaps 12 feet. She waited. She waited until the house was deep in the night, until the sounds of the plaza were reduced to a single, drunken song and the barking of a distant dog. A pebble hit the glass of her window. She looked. A small shadow was standing in the garden below. Naya. Lillian's heart leaped. She did not know how the child had gotten here, how she had known. She did not care. She tied 2 bedsheets together, her hands quick and sure. She did not hesitate. She climbed out the window, her silk dress tearing on the adobe wall, and she dropped the last few feet into the dark. Naya did not speak. She simply grabbed Lillian's hand, her own hand small and cold, and led her. She moved like a shadow, through the servants' gate, across a dark street, and into the one place in Santa Fe that felt like a refuge, the stables. He was there, in the deepest, darkest stall, his hand on the muzzle of his pinto mare to keep her quiet. He had not left. Lillian ran to him, the sound of her torn silk a hiss in the hay. She did not stop to think. She slammed into his chest, and his arms came around her, a reflex, a memory. They stood, holding each other, in the warm, animal-scented dark. It was the first moment of peace, of truth. They had known since the town. "You heard," she whispered into his shirt. It was not a question. "I heard." His voice was a low rumble, and she could feel the vibration of it in her bones. "The accident, the attack on my people." She pulled back, her hands on his arms. "Then you know what you have to do." From the bodice of her dress, she pulled a folded packet of oilcloth. The original documents, the ones she had not sent with Miguel, the ones she had sewn into her corset that morning, knowing she would be searched. "This is everything," she said, her voice shaking but hard. "The real map, the original letters from Kane's paymaster. This is the proof. Take it." He looked at the packet, then at her face. "Lillian, what is this?" "It is my will," she said, her voice breaking for just a second. "It is the only thing I have left to give. You have to take this. You have to take Naya. You have to ride out of here tonight. Ride, and do not look back. Get to your people. Use this. Get it to a journalist, a general, someone in Washington. But you must save your band. You must." He was staring at her as if she were mad. "And you? What about you?" "I am already dead," she said, and her voice was a terrible, flat thing. "Tomorrow, I will put on a white dress, and I will smile, and I will be engaged to a man I have never seen, and then I will have an accident. My father's accounts will be settled. Kane's lands will be secured. Captain Reed will get his revenge." She gripped his shirt, her knuckles white. "But you, Coda, you must not let him win. You cannot let him use my death to murder your people. If you are here, if you are caught, he wins. He kills us all. But if you leave, if you survive, you take his reason away. He cannot attack your camp as retaliation if you are already gone, taking the child with you." She was right. The logic was brutal, and it was perfect. She was sacrificing herself, not just for him, but for his people. She was atoning for her father's sins, for the whole corrupt system, with her own life. "No," he said. It was a guttural, wounded sound. I will not leave you." "You must," she said, and her hands came up to frame his face. His skin was rough, his beard a dark shadow. "Coda, Tahan, you are the survivor. You have to survive this. For them, for Naya. Do not let my life be for nothing." He looked at her eyes, the color of the sky after the rain. He saw her courage, and it shamed him. He had been living for his ghosts, for his guilt. She was showing him how to live for a purpose. "I cannot," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You can," she said. "You are the strongest man I have ever known." She pulled his head down and kissed him. It was not the kiss on the mountain, the frantic, desperate coupling against death. This was a goodbye. It was slow, and it was deep, and it was full of a pain that had no name. It tasted of her tears, which were now flowing, and of the hay, and of a lifetime of things they would never say. His hand came up, not to grab, but to hold, his fingers tangling in her fine, clean hair, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw. He held her as if she were the last piece of light in a darkening world, and he was trying to memorize her shape. He poured all his grief, all his respect, and all of his broken, impossible love into that one final kiss. She was the one who broke it. She had to be. She pulled away, her breath a shudder. "I have to go back," she whispered, "before they know I am gone." He did not let go. His eyes were blazing in the dark. "Lillian," he breathed, his voice raw. "Go," she said. She pulled his hand from her face, kissed his rough palm, and folded his fingers over it, as if to hold the kiss there. "Save your people, and live, just live." She turned, her torn silk dress a whisper of a ghost, and she slipped out of the stable. She did not run. She walked, her back straight, her head high, back to her prison, back to her fate. She was Lillian Hale, and she was choosing her own end. She was walking to her own execution, and she was doing it believing that her death would buy life for the people of the man she loved. Coda stood in the dark, his hand clenched, the warmth of her kiss burning in his palm. He was alone, with her sacrifice, and the smell of her on his hands. The dawn was a cold, bitter line of red in the east. Coda had found a Comanche runner, a young man he knew from the high plains, who was in Santa Fe to trade. He gave the man the packet of documents. He gave him the pouch of gold, the original payment from Everett Hale, the money he had kept. "Take this," Coda said, his voice flat, his face like stone. "Take the child." He put Naya, who was wrapped in a new blanket, into the man's arms. "Ride to my people. Give this gold to the elders. Tell them to take this packet and ride north. Find the Ute. Hide with them. Do not stop. Do not wait." The man, his eyes wide at the gold and the urgency, simply nodded. "Go," Coda said. He watched them ride out, Naya's small, pale face looking back at him, a silent question in her eyes. He watched until they were just a speck, disappearing into the red dawn. He had done it. He had kept his promise to Lillian. He had saved his people. He had sent her proof away. He had sent the child away. He had nothing left. He had fulfilled his contract, all of them. He mounted his pinto. He was a hollow man, a shell. He rode slowly out of Santa Fe, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped. He was a man going to his own execution, a life without meaning. He reached the top of the ridge overlooking the town. He stopped, looking back at the smoking chimneys, the lines of new iron for the railroad, the fort on the hill. And as he watched, the sound came. The same sound he had heard the day he arrived, the long, mournful, arrogant scream of the train whistle. It was the sound of Silas Kane, the sound of Reed, the sound of the world that had taken everything from him. He closed his eyes, and he did not see the train. He saw the fire. He saw his wife's face, her eyes wide with terror. He saw his son, limp in his arms. He saw the laughing, blonde-mustached face of Captain Abel Reed. And then he saw Lillian, walking into the dark, her back straight, her green silk dress torn. He saw her face as she said, "I am already dead." He realized, in a sudden, sickening flash of clarity, that he had been a fool. Leaving did not save his people. It only doomed them. Reed did not need a reason. He had one. The accident would still happen. Lillian would still die. And Reed would still ride on his camp, with or without Coda, to avenge her death. Lillian's sacrifice would be for nothing. His band would be slaughtered, and he, Tahan, the survivor, would be the only one left. A coward who had run while the woman he loved was murdered. He had been hired to escort her. He was paid to be a guard, to keep his distance, to protect her body until he could deliver her. The contract was a white man's chain. But the contract was broken. The gold was gone. The chains were gone. All that was left was the woman who had looked at him, a savage, an enemy, and had seen a man. The woman who had offered her own life to save his people, the people who were her father's victims. A Comanche was hired to escort her, but he had ended up following her, into a love, into a fight that he could not escape. His head came up. The hollowness was gone, replaced by a cold, pure, diamond-hard rage. He was not a survivor, living on guilt. He was a warrior, living for justice. He pulled the pinto's head, turning the horse in a tight, rearing circle. He was no longer the paid escort. He was a Comanche warrior, and he was going to war. He spurred the horse, and he rode, not out of Santa Fe, but back into it, back into the fiery furnace, back to the wolf's den, to follow the woman he loved. He found Miguel Santos in the back room of the cantina, drinking coffee and counting receipts. Miguel looked up, his eyes widening. "Madre de Dios," Miguel whispered. "I thought you were long gone. I saw your child leave this morning." "She is not my child," Coda said, his voice flat. He stood at the table, his shadow falling over the account books. "And I am not gone. This is not a good day for you to be here." "My friend," Miguel said, his voice low. "Reed has men on every corner. They are watching for renegades. They are setting a trap." "I know," Coda said. "They are setting a trap for a dead woman." Miguel stopped, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "What?" "Silas Kane and Captain Reed are going to murder Lillian Hale tonight. After the party, they will call it a carriage accident, and they will blame it on my people. Then Reed will ride out and slaughter my band." Miguel put the cup down. He crossed himself, a gesture that was half piety, half habit. "They will murder her. Their guest, the daughter of Hale. She knows too much. She has proof of their crimes." Miguel was silent. He looked at Coda, at the fire in his eyes. He had seen this look before, in men who were about to die, or in men who were about to change the world. "And you," Miguel said, "you are going to stop them. One man against Kane, against the United States Army." "I am," Coda said. Miguel sighed. He looked at his books, at the neat columns of figures. He looked at the crucifix on the wall. He stood up. "Kane has been choking this territory for 5 years," he said softly. "He brings his railroad, but he brings his laws, his prices, his soldiers. He treats us like dogs." He looked at Coda. "You are a madman. You will be shot before you get within 20 feet of the house." "Then I will die," Coda said, "but I will not die running." Miguel was silent for a long time. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. "One man cannot, but this is Santa Fe. Kane has many partners, but he has more enemies. The party tonight, everyone will be there. The governor, the judge, the other officers from the fort, all of them, eating Kane's food, drinking his wine." So Coda asked. "So," Miguel said, his eyes bright, "you do not stop a snake by cutting off its tail. You must cut off its head, and you must do it, in front of witnesses." Miguel unlocked a cabinet. He pulled out a box. "My men, the ones who work the wagons, the ones who sweep the floors. They are in that house. They are serving the drinks. They see everything." He looked at Coda. "We cannot stop the party. We must join it. Reed wants to catch a ghost. We will give him one." Coda stood in the shadows of the alley, across from the Kane compound. The sun was setting. The music was starting. Carriages were arriving, spilling out men in black suits and women in bright, impossible colors. He was a shadow, a ghost, a promise. His hand was on his knife. He watched the lights come on in the big house, a bright, cheerful beacon, and he felt the cold, hard pull of his purpose. He was waiting. He was no longer a man between two worlds. He had chosen his world. He was walking into the fire, and he was going to bring the whole corrupt house down with him. He whispered the words in Comanche, a prayer to the land that had chosen her, and had now chosen him. The earth waits, and I wait with it. The grand salon of Silas Kane's home was a blaze of impossible light. Oil lamps, a dozen chandeliers, and hundreds of candles burned, illuminating a room packed with the architects of the New West. The governor of the territory was there, his face slick with sweat and wine. Judges, investors from the East, beef barons, and a preening collection of cavalry officers in their dress blue uniforms all mingled, their voices a loud, confident hum. The air was thick with the smell of rich food, expensive perfume, and the sweet, cloying scent of power. A string trio sawed away at a waltz, providing a thin, civilized veneer to the raw greed in the room. Lillian Hale was the center of it all, a vision in white. Kane had provided the dress, a virginal gown of white silk and lace, a cruel irony that was not lost on her. She was the lamb, dressed for her own sacrifice. Her hair was pinned up with pearls, her face pale but perfectly composed. She smiled. She nodded. She played the part of the dutiful, slightly overwhelmed bride-to-be. She had even met Kane's son, a pale, nervous young man named Walter, who seemed more afraid of his father than of anything on the frontier. She had spoken to him sweetly, her hand on his arm, and he had blushed and stammered, completely unaware that she was a dead woman. She had kept one final, damning letter in the bodice of her dress. It was the one letter from her father, urging Kane to resolve the Lillian problem with all necessary speed. It was her last bullet, and she did not know if she would have the courage to fire it. In the shadows, Coda moved. He was invisible. He was no longer a Comanche warrior. He was a Mexican servant, one of half a dozen Miguel had smuggled into the house. He wore the simple white shirt and black trousers of the staff. He had cut the leather thong from his hair, and it hung loose, hidden under a wide-brimmed sombrero he kept pulled low. He carried a tray of empty glasses, his head down, his eyes scanning the room, his skin crawling from the proximity to so many enemies. Miguel was in the kitchen, organizing the chaos. A man in his element, he had armed his most trusted men, the waiters, the musicians, the cooks, with knives, pistols, and a plan. They were waiting. They were all waiting. Captain Abel Reed was at the center of a laughing circle of his officers. He was resplendent, his uniform buttons polished to a mirror's shine, his blonde mustache waxed. He drank champagne and accepted the congratulations, his eyes constantly moving, searching for Lillian. He found her near the grand staircase. He cut through the crowd, his smile wide and gallant, and bowed. "Miss Hale, a breath of air. The room is terribly stuffy, and the night is cool." He offered his arm. It was not a request. It was a command. Lillian, playing her part, placed her hand on his blue sleeve, and he led her through the French doors onto a dark, private balcony. The music and the laughter faded to a dull roar behind them. Below them, the town of Santa Fe was dark, the mountains a black, jagged line against the stars. "You are a success, Miss Hale," Reed said, his voice no longer the boisterous tone of the party. It was low, intimate, and cold as the night air. "My compliments. You play the part well." "I do not know what you mean, Captain," Lillian said, her voice a perfect imitation of a frightened, obedient woman. "I am simply doing as my father wishes." Reed laughed, a soft, truly ugly sound. "Oh, I think you do, but it is almost over. Your performance has been a triumph." He leaned closer, his sleeve brushing her bare arm. "After the party, after the announcement, you will be tired. I have arranged a special carriage to take you to the fort. For your safety, it will be more private." "That is very kind of you, Captain," Lillian whispered, her heart a cold stone in her chest. "Yes," he said, his voice a purr. "It is a long drive, a high pass. You know, carriage wheels. They are unpredictable things. Sometimes they break, especially on sharp turns." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a perfectly feigned innocence. "Oh, but that sounds dangerous." "It is a dangerous land. Miss Hale," he said, his hand lightly touching the small of her back, "full of renegades, savages. One never knows when they might appear." He smiled, his teeth white in the starlight. "But do not worry. It will be very quick. A clean, tragic accident. And you will be a hero. The inspiration for a final, cleansing campaign. Your father will be so very proud." He was confessing. He was savoring it, enjoying her feigned terror, using his power like a drug. Lillian had to force herself not to recoil. She had to remember every word. I think I am cold." "Captain," she whispered, "may we go back inside?" "Of course, my dear," he said, his gallant smile returning. "It is time for the announcement. In any case." He led her back into the blinding light of the salon, back into the noise. Silas Kane was standing by the massive fireplace, tapping a spoon against a crystal glass. The room quieted. My friend Kane's voice was warm, a father's voice, full of joy. "My friends, you have graced my humble home tonight, and I thank you. You are here to celebrate a new chapter for the West, a joining of families, a joining of purpose. My son, Walter, and this lovely flower of the East, Miss Lillian Hale." There was applause. Walter blushed a violent red. Lillian smiled, her eyes downcast. "But before the champagne," Kane continued, "I believe our dear Lillian, my new daughter, would like to say a word of thanks. My dear." He gestured to her. This was it. This was the moment. Reed, beside her, gave her a small, encouraging push. He wanted her to play the lamb to the very end. Lillian stepped forward. The room was silent. Every eye was on her. She looked small and white and fragile. "Thank you, Mr. Kane," she said, her voice clear and sweet. "Thank you, Governor, Captain Reed, gentlemen." She unfolded the single piece of paper she had held in her hand. The letter from her father. "My heart is very full," she said, "so full that I must share with you the words of my own father, Everett Hale, who could not be here tonight." Kane's smile froze. Reed's eyes narrowed. "He writes to Mr. Kane," Lillian continued, her voice growing stronger, clearer, cutting through the silence. "His words are so moving. My dear Kane, regarding the railroad bonds, they are secured. The lands from the last army sweep will be released for sale by the end of the month." The governor's face paled. A murmur went through the room. She is nervous," Kane said, laughing, a strained, ugly sound. "My dear, that is not—" "I am so glad," Lillian read on, her voice ringing, "that your men, the ones dressed as Comanche, were so successful in proving the hostile threat. The investors were very impressed by the reports of the attacks. It has made securing the Army's cooperation much easier." The room was as silent as a tomb. "As for the remaining problem," Lillian read, her eyes blazing, "finding Reed in the crowd. The Lillian problem, I trust you to resolve it, as you have resolved all the others. A carriage accident, as you suggest, sounds both tragic and final, and, as you say, it will be the perfect pretext for Reed to clean out the last of the Quahati band. 2 birds with 1 stone." She looked up, her face a mask of terrible, righteous fury. "Thank you, gentlemen. You have truly shown me the meaning of building the West." "Hysteria," Kane roared, his face purple. She is sick. The journey has made her mad. She is a woman. Hysterical. She is a traitor, Reed bellowed, his face a mask of pure hate, his hand going to his pistol. She is in league with the Comanche. She is a spy. Sergeant, arrest this woman. Arrest her for treason. 2 soldiers, who had been guarding the door, started to move toward her. Reed took a step, his arm outstretched to grab her. And in that second, the world exploded. A waiter, one of Miguel's men, smashed his tray into the face of the nearest soldier. From the balcony, a rifle shot cracked, but it was not aimed at a person. It was aimed at the main chandelier, the massive crystal and iron fixture. Its chain shattered, crashed to the floor in a rain of fire and glass, plunging the center of the room into darkness. Now Miguel's voice roared from the kitchen. The room was chaos. Women screamed, men shouted, drawing pistols. The string trio was suddenly playing a very different tune, a fast, violent one, as Miguel's men, the servants, drew their own weapons. A dark shape, moving with impossible speed, came from the shadows. Coda. He had shed his hat and tray, and he was a warrior. He threw a soldier over a table piled high with food, and he landed in the center of the room, a pistol in his hand, aimed not at the crowd, but at one man. Reed Coda's voice was a roar, a name, a curse. Reed, his pistol already out, turned and fired. The shot went wide, hitting a terrified investor. The room was a mess of screaming bodies, gun smoke, and darkness. Miguel's men were shooting at the lamps, one by one, taking the room from twilight to pure, smoky black. Coda was not firing. He was moving, a shadow among shadows, his eyes on the flash of Reed's gun. He was closing the distance. Reed was trying to get to Lillian, who was huddled by the fireplace. He fired again, blindly, into the dark. Get the girl. Do not let her escape. He raised his pistol to fire again, but a hand clamped onto his wrist. Coda! They came together, not with guns, but with a brute, primal force. Coda's pistol was knocked from his hand, and Reed's went skittering across the floor. This was not a soldier and a scout. This was a man, and the ghost he had created. They crashed through a table, their hands locked, rolling on the floor in a chaos of broken glass and spilled wine. You, Reed spat, his face inches from Coda's. You filthy living dog, you should have stayed dead. You killed my son, Coda growled, his voice a tear in his throat. He slammed his fist into Reed's face. I killed hundreds, Reed screamed, his voice raw, his civilized mask gone, revealing the monster beneath. He was shouting for the whole room to hear, for the darkness, for God. I burned your whole filthy camp. I watched them run, and I will kill your band. Do you hear me? I will burn them all from the earth. Just like I did that night just for the railroad. For civilization. Coda had his knife. Reed had his... They were on their knees, in a small circle of light from a single, burning candle, their bodies pressed together, their knives at each other's throats. Across the room, Silas Kane had not been idle. He was not a fighter. He was a survivor. He was backing toward a side door, the one that led to his carriage, and he had a shield. He had grabbed Lillian, his arm a vice around her neck, his own small, silver pistol pressed to her temple. No one move, Kane shrieked, his voice high with panic. Let me go, or she dies. I mean it. Coda heard her name. He turned his head, his knife still at Reed's throat. He saw her. He saw Kane, his eyes mad with fear. He saw the gun at her head. It was a second. It was a lifetime. Reed, seeing his chance, seeing Coda's distraction, lunged, putting all his weight into his knife. But Coda was already moving. He let go of Reed. He roared her name. Lillian, and he threw himself, not at Reed, but at her, at Kane. It was an impossible choice. He was abandoning his revenge to save her life. Reed's knife, which had been aimed at Coda's heart, sliced across his shoulder, a deep, burning line of fire. A soldier, seeing Coda lunge, fired his rifle. The bullet slammed into Coda's same shoulder, spinning him around, but his momentum was too great. He crashed into Cain and Lillian, a solid wall of flesh and blood. The three of them went down, a tangle of limbs. Cain's pistol fired, the shot going wild, shattering a mirror on the wall. They hit the marble floor, and Lillian, her head striking the tile, was free. Coda lay on the floor, the room spinning, a double fire in his shoulder, the blood pumping out, hot and fast. He looked up. The fight was over. Miguel and his men had their pistols on the soldiers. The governor was hiding under a table. Silas Cain was on his hands and knees, his fine suit covered in blood and wine, his face a mask of defeated terror. Miguel's man had a rifle to the back of his head. The papers, the ones Lillian had read, were scattered on the floor around him, covered in his own blood. And Captain Abel Reed was still on his knees, his eyes wide, a look of profound surprise on his face. He looked down. In the chaos of Coda's lunge, a stray bullet from a soldier, from Miguel, no one would ever know had found its mark. He was dead, his hand still clutching his knife, his own confession, his final epitaph. The room was silent, save for the sobbing of a few women and the smell of smoke. Coda tried to move, but the strength was gone. The floor was cold. Coda. He looked. Lillian was crawling to him. Her white dress was smeared with his blood. Her face was bruised. She was alive. She was weeping, but she was smiling. A terrible, beautiful, broken smile. "You came back," she whispered, her hand, small and shaking, covering the wound on his shoulder, as if she could hold the life in. "You came back." He looked at her, at the woman he had crossed hell for. He tried to smile. "I told you, he rascal, I would get you to Santa Fe, alive." He closed his eyes, the darkness of the room finally matching the darkness that was rushing in to claim him. The world came back to Coda in shafts of dusty light and the sharp smell of lye soap. He was not in the grand salon. He was in a small, clean room on a narrow cot. The fire in his shoulder had cooled to a deep, throbbing ache. He tried to move, and a hand, small and firm, pressed him back down. "Be still," Lillian said. He focused. She was sitting beside him. Her fine party dress was gone, replaced by a simple muslin skirt and shirt, the kind Miguel's wife might wear. Her hair was in a simple braid. Her face was pale, exhausted, but her eyes, the color of the sky after a storm, were clear. "You are at Miguel's," she said, her voice quiet. "You have been here for 2 days. The doctor said the bullet passed through. The knife cut was deeper, but it will heal. You are very, very strong." Reed Coda's voice was a dry croak. "Dead. Cain. In a cell at the fort. He is awaiting a federal marshal." Coda let his head fall back onto the thin pillow. He was alive. He had won. But it did not feel like victory. It felt like silence. The aftermath had been swift, a civilized storm following the chaotic one. The governor, having been pulled from under the dining table, had found his authority in the cold light of dawn, with Silas Cain bound, Captain Reed dead, and a room full of Santa Fe's most powerful citizens as witnesses. The truth had nowhere to hide. A hearing was convened immediately, not in a courtroom, but in the ruined, blood-spattered salon, the scene of the crime. Lillian Hale, her white dress stained with Coda's blood, stood before them. She did not speak as a hysterical woman. She spoke as her father's daughter. She was cold, precise, and articulate. She laid out the facts. She had the letters. She had Reed's own public confession, his screaming boasts of the Washita and his plans for her accident. Miguel Santos, now a respected pillar of the community, corroborated everything. He spoke of the fake Comanches, of the flow of guns, of the widespread fear Cain and Reed had cultivated. Several of the soldiers, the ones Coda had thrown across the room, testified as well. They spoke of Reed's orders, their own unease, and the rumors of the retaliation they had been preparing for. The system, the one built on lies, had collapsed under the weight of its own audacity. Silas Kane was ruined. His empire of paper and blood was frozen. The railroad, for a time, stopped its relentless march. The partners, the investors, the politicians who had drunk his wine the night before, were the first to condemn him. They were shocked, appalled, and deceived. They were, above all, men who knew how to find the winning side. For Coda's people, the news came just in time. The runner Coda had sent with Naya, and the gold had been intercepted not by Reed, but by Miguel's men, who had been watching the trails. With Reed dead, the immediate, vindictive attack on the Quahati band was cancelled. The acting commander at the fort, faced with Reed's proven crimes, had no stomach for a massacre. But it was not a complete victory. It was a reprieve, not a pardon. The system was broken, but the machine still turned. Coda's people were still starving. The order still stood. They were to be moved to the reservation. They would not be murdered on the way. They would not be given the worst, fever-ridden land, but they would be moved. The world had been saved, but the world was still ending. Coda lay in that cot for a week. The fire in his shoulder was replaced by the fire in his mind. He had done it. He had avenged his family. He had killed the ghost that haunted him. And in doing so, he had lost the one thing that had defined him. He was no longer a man driven by guilt. He was just a man, wounded, in a small room, in a town that was not his, in a world that had no place for him. Lillian was his constant shadow. She brought him broth. She changed his bandages. Her touch professional, impersonal. Yet her proximity was a torture. She would wash the wound, her fingers moving with a clinical efficiency. And he would watch her, the memory of her in his arms on the mountain, her mouth desperate against his, a wall of fire between them. She was Miss Hale again. She was kind, she was dutiful, but she was distant, and Coda, in his weakness, let her be. He did not know how to cross the distance. He did not know if he had the right. On the 8th day, the final piece of the old world arrived. A carriage, black and severe, pulled into the plaza. It was not a frontier wagon. It was a Boston carriage, and the man who stepped out of it wore a coat that cost more than Miguel's entire cantina. Everett Hale had arrived. He did not come to the cantina. He sent a summons. Lillian was to meet him at the governor's mansion. Lillian stood. Coda watched her. She smoothed her simple skirt. She looked, for a moment, like the girl at the Dodge House, frightened and cold. "Lillian," Coda said, his voice quiet. She stopped, her hand on the door. "Do not let him hurt you," he said. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "He cannot hurt me anymore," she said. "He is just a man, like any other." She met her father in a drawing room that smelled of old leather and stale cigars. Everett Hale was not raging. He was not, like Kane, a man of base passions. He was a man of cold, hard numbers. He looked at his daughter, and he saw a ledger that would not balance. "You have destroyed," he said, his voice flat. 10 years of work. You have bankrupted one of the most powerful men in the territory and humiliated your family. You have cost me millions. Millions. I have cost you nothing." "Father," Lillian said, her voice as cold as his. She stood in the center of the room. She would not sit. "You have cost yourself. I read your letter, the one describing the Lillian problem, the one ordering my death." Everett Hale had the grace to flinch. That was a misunderstanding, a figure of speech. "Was it?" Lillian asked. "Or was it just business? You have been selling land you did not own, clearing it with the blood of men like Captain Reed, and paying for it with the lives of people whose only crime was that they were here first." "I was building a country," he roared, his control finally breaking. Civilization. The railroad is progress. We are taming a wilderness. You are not taming it, Lillian said. You are murdering it. You taught me about justice. Father, you had me read the law. You told me our name meant something. It meant honor. It meant truth. She took a step closer. I have spent the last month learning what those words mean. And they have nothing to do with you. They have nothing to do with your money, or your railroad, or your civilization. I did exactly what you taught me. I did not do what you did. Hale stared at his daughter. He saw, perhaps for the first time, not a child, not property, but a woman, and he saw that she was lost to him. He saw the iron in her spine, and he knew, with the cold certainty of a businessman, that this investment was a total loss. He had loved power more than he had loved her, and now he was left with only one. What will you do? He asked, his voice suddenly old, tired. I will not be returning to Boston, Lillian said. You cannot stay here, he said, a note of panic in his voice. This is not your world. You will be an outcast. I am already an outcast, Lillian said. I have been since the moment I stepped off that train. Go home. Father, count your money. There is nothing for you here. She turned and left him standing alone in the room. She returned to the cantina. Coda was sitting up, his back against the wall, his shoulder wrapped in clean linen. He was dressed, his own buckskins clean. He was waiting. Lillian came in, her face set. She did not speak. She began packing a small bag. So, Coda said, his voice quiet, you are going back to Boston. Lillian stopped, her hand clenched around a shirt. She turned to him, her eyes flashing with a sudden, hot anger. Is that what you think? She asked, her voice low and dangerous. It is what is right, Coda said, his gaze fixed on his hands. Your world is there. Your life. This. He gestured to the small adobe room, to his own wounded body. This is not your life. This is dust and blood and endings. I cannot ask you to be a part of it. You cannot ask me, she repeated, her voice rising. You think, after all this, that you have the right to ask me, or tell me, anything. She strode over to him, her anger a palpable force. You think I am a mistake? Do you not a problem? Just like my father, just like Cain, something that has happened to you, a complication in your tragic life. No, he said, looking up, his own anger rising. I think you are a lady from Boston. I think you are alive. And I think you should stay that way. Go home. Be safe. Forget this. Forget, she cried. You think this is something I can forget that night on the mountain? Was that an accident? Was that just a dust and blood? You pulled me back into the world? Coda, I was a ghost in a silk dress, and you made me real, and now you want to send me back. I have nothing to offer you, he yelled, getting to his feet, the sudden movement causing him to wince in pain. What do you want from me? I am a man with no people, no land, and no future. My band is being herded onto a reservation, to die slowly instead of quickly. My life is over. I will not drag you down with me. You think love is an accident, do you not? She whispered, the tears finally coming, hot and angry. You think it is a sickness you have to cure, a mistake you have to fix. You think you can just push me away, like you did on the trail, and pretend I am just cargo. She was standing close, her hands fisted at her sides. I am not cargo. Coda, I am not your prisoner, and I am not your mistake. He stared at her, his heart raw, his defenses shattered. He had no words. He had been fighting for so long, for revenge, for survival. He did not know how to fight for this. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the deep, agonizing pain. Her anger broke, leaving only a vast, aching sadness. Where will you go? She asked, her voice soft. To my people, he said, his voice hoarse. To the reservation, to see what is left. Lillian was silent. She looked at this man, this warrior, who had faced down an army but was terrified of a future. She looked at his wounded shoulder and his wounded heart. "Then I will go with you," she said. "No," he said, a note of panic in his voice. "Coda, it is not. It is not a place for you. It is a place of endings." "Then I will see the ending," she said, her voice firm. "I have seen the lie. Now I will see the truth. I will see the world you are fighting for. I will see the people my father's money has hurt." She put her hand on his arm, her touch light, not as a lover, not as a nurse, but as a partner. "I am not going to Boston, Coda, and I am not going to let you go alone. You are done being an escort, but I am not done walking beside you." He looked at her hand on his arm, and then at her face. He saw no fear. He saw no doubt. He saw only a terrifying, stubborn, and beautiful strength. He had thought he was saving her, but he was wrong. She was saving him. He did not argue. He just nodded. Once. Miguel found them an hour later. He had 2 horses, Coda's Pinto and a steady bay mare for Lillian, and he had a third, smaller horse. Riding on its back, her face scrubbed clean, her hair brushed, was Naya. The child had been kept safe at the edge of town, waiting. She saw Coda, and her face split into a gap-toothed, brilliant smile. She slid off the horse and ran. Not to him, but to Lillian. She threw her arms around Lillian's waist, burying her face in her skirt. Lillian looked at Coda over the child's head, her own eyes shining. The 3 of them mounted, a strange, impossible family, born of fire and blood. Coda, the wounded warrior. Lillian, the refugee from civilization. And Naya, the child of 2 worlds. They rode out of Santa Fe, not east, toward the world of cities and trains, but south, toward the red, broken land of the Comanche. The wind was dry. The sky was a vast, aching blue, and the dust of the trail rose to meet them. They did not know what was next. They only knew that, for the first time, they were riding toward it together. The high valley woke to a cold, clean dawn. It had been 5 years since the night of gunfire and blood in Santa Fe. This place, nestled in the high borderlands between the New Mexico Territory and the Texas Panhandle, was not on any white man's map. It was not the reservation. It was not a town. It was theirs. A few sturdy cabins of pine and adobe, mixed with a half-dozen Comanche teepees, huddled near a creek that ran from the mountains, a herd of horses, a mix of tough Comanche paints and broad-chested ranch stock, grazed in the high meadow. This was the place they had built. 1 stone, 1 truce, 1 hard-won day at a time. A woman stepped onto the porch of the largest cabin. It was Lillian, but it was not. The pale, angular woman from Boston was gone, weathered away by 5 years of hard sun and high-altitude wind. Her hair, still the color of a clean sky, was pulled back in a practical braid, but woven into it was a single strand of blue and white Comanche beadwork. She wore a simple calico dress, and she moved with a purpose that was not learned in a drawing room. In this valley, she was not Miss Hale. She was Lily Greyhawk. She held a child on her hip, a little girl, perhaps 2 years old, with her father's jet-black hair and her mother's storm-gray eyes. From the corral, Coda emerged. The years had settled him. The haunted, burning rage of the scout had been banked, replaced by the steady, watchful warmth of a fire built to last. He was a husband. He was a father. He was, when the need arose, still a warrior. He was walking with a group of children. 4, 5, a mix of Comanche, Mexican, and pale-faced children from the valley. He was not teaching them to read. He was teaching them to see, to read the tracks of a fox, to know the change in the wind. He was no longer a scout for the army, a tool for his own destruction. He was a guide. The word had spread. Settlers, and even soldiers, now sought him out, paying him in coin and cattle to guide them safely around the territories, to pass through this land without violence. He had become a man of peace, which was a harder, more dangerous job than being a man of war. This was their world. The last of Coda's Quahati band lived here, beside the remnants of 2 Mexican families who had lost their land to the railroad, and 1 white family from Missouri who had lost their faith in everything else. It was not a heaven. It was hard. It was poor. The winters were a white, howling test of will. The pressure from the government, from the new ranchers, was a constant, low-grade war, but it was a model. It was a start. A young woman, tall and strong, perhaps 16 now, strode from one of the teepees. Her face was bright and sharp with intelligence. It was Naya. She was a woman, no longer a ghost. She had become Lillian's shadow, her sister, her apprentice. She was the bridge. She translated Lillian's English words for the Comanche elders, and she translated the elders' stories for Lillian. Lily Naya called, her English now crisp and clear. "The wagon from Miguel is here. He has the mail." Lillian shifted the child on her hip and went to meet the wagon. The news from the outside world was like a letter from a different, colder star. Silas Kane, she learned, was still in a federal prison, a sick, broken old man, his empire of land and iron carved up by other, equally hungry wolves. His railroad had been slowed, checked, and brought under government control, in no small part by the letters and articles Lillian continued to send east. And her father, Everett Hale. He was a recluse in his Boston home, his health failing. He sent letters to Lillian, letters that never quite said he was sorry, but were full of a strange, meticulous accounting. He sent money. He was funding the school in their valley, and another on the reservation at Fort Sill. He was trying, in the only way he knew, to balance the ledger, to atone for the blood with gold. Lillian took his money, every dollar, and she used it to build the world he had tried to erase. That evening, the work was done. The sun was a fire of orange and rose, pouring over the western edge of the valley. The horses ran, a dark, thundering line. In the last of the light, Coda, Lillian, and their daughter, whose name was Sky, sat on the porch. Lillian leaned her head on his shoulder. His arm, the one torn by knife and bullet, was solid around her. The scars were a part of him, a map of the road that had brought him here. "The new teacher for the school will be on the next wagon," she said, her voice quiet. "Good," Coda said. "The children must learn the white man's paper. It is the only way to fight him. They must learn to use his own weapon, his words." "And Miguel says the ranchers upstream are taking too much water again," Lillian murmured. "We will be short by summer." "I will ride up in the morning," Coda said. "I will talk to them." "He also agrees about the trading post," she said, a note of triumph in her voice. "If we build it here, at the crossroads, we can be the ones to set the price for grain. We can be the ones who trade with the Ute. We can build our own bank, of our own work." He nodded, his chin resting on her hair. They were not just surviving. They were planning. They were building. Later that night, the children were asleep. Naya, their daughter Sky, and 2 other boys they had taken in from the reservation were wrapped in blankets, safe. A low fire burned in the hearth, a small, warm heart in the center of the cabin. Coda and Lillian sat on a blanket, their backs to the wall, their hands clasped. The silence was not empty. It was full. He turned her face to his. He looked at her, at the lines of laughter and worry that now framed her eyes. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the rock ledge, a defense against death. It was not the agonizing final kiss of the stable. It was the kiss of a man who was home. It was slow, and it was deep, and it held the peace of 5 hard-won years. It was the kiss of a husband and a wife who had seen the worst of the world, and had built a better one, just for themselves. She smiled against his mouth. "You know," she whispered, her fingers tracing the old, silver scar on his shoulder. "I have been thinking. My father hired you, an escort." He grunted, a soft sound of amusement in his chest. It was a bad contract. "I am extending it," she said, her gray eyes shining in the firelight. "I am afraid you are not allowed to resign. Mr. Greyhawk, this is a contract for life." He pulled her closer, his arms strong around her, his face in her hair. "Good," he whispered, his voice rough. "I am not done yet." They sat, and they listened to the sounds of the valley. From far to the south, so faint it was almost a ghost, came the lonely, high wail of a train whistle. The iron snake, still moving, still changing the world. But in the valley, another sound rose, from the teepee of the Quahati elders, the steady, constant heartbeat of the drum. Thump, 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 thump. And from the cabin where Miguel's family now lived, the bright, clear notes of a Spanish guitar, a song of love and defiance. And in their own cabin, the sound of their daughter, turning in her sleep, her breath a soft, peaceful sigh. The world that was, the world that is, and the world they were making. Lillian looked at the man who held her, the man who had been a shadow, a memory, a weapon, the man who was her anchor. "If I could go back," she whispered, her voice thick. "If I could be that girl in Boston again, stepping onto the train, I would do it all again. I would ride through every grain of dust. I would face every bullet. I would do it all, just as long as I knew it would lead me here." Coda was silent. He held her, breathing her in, the smell of wood smoke in her skin. "You do not see it. Lily," he said, his voice so low it was almost a prayer. "You think you are the one being escorted? You think you are following me?" He pulled back, his hands framing her face, his dark eyes looking into her, all the way down to her soul. "I was a dead man," he said. "I was a ghost, living in the ashes of a fire that burned my life away. I was nothing but rage and dust." He touched her cheek, his calloused thumb a gentle weight. "You were the one who walked into the fire. You were the one who pulled me out." He held her, and she held him. The fire burned low, and the great, wide, starry sky of the west kept watch. A Comanche was hired to escort her, but in the end, he had followed her, into a love and into a life that he never again wanted or needed to escape. Thank you for listening to this story. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from. Please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and let us all connect. If you enjoyed this tale, be sure to subscribe to the channel, Wild West Tales. Give this video a like and show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by many more.